Chapter 733. Under the leadership of Prince Long Qing, the cavalry of the left king's palace and the allied forces of Yan, Song, and Qi broke through the Tang territory. In the beginning, there was no resistance. The northeast border military of the Tang Empire was destroyed. Although many of the Tang soldiers were still alive, they were struggling to survive under the pursuit of the Yan army. Even if they escaped back to the Tang territory, they would not be able to fight. The allied forces that invaded the Tang territory, especially the grassland cavalry from the wilderness, did whatever they wanted in the eastern territory of the Tang Empire. They burned, killed, looted, and committed all kinds of crimes. The grassland cavalry's arms were full of gold and silver. They looked excited and urged their horses to gallop back and forth on the official road. Long Qing looked at the scene at the foot of the hill and frowned slightly. He said coldly, "Consolidate the military discipline. Don't waste time in these remote places. We have to reach Chang'an as soon as possible." The subordinate took the order and left. But some generals had a different view. The undefeated reputation of the Tang Empire for 1,000 years had left an indelible fear in the hearts of these generals. Although the war was going well, they had never expected to break through Chang'an city, including the grassland cavalry. They thought that they should retreat after plundering in the Tang territory to prevent the Tang's counterattack and revenge. The Tang Empire today is not the Tang Empire of the past. The siblings in Chang'an keep making mistakes. Of course, even if they did not make any mistakes, they would not persist. Because heaven wants to destroy the Tang Empire. Long Qing said, "Now the Tang Empire is surrounded by enemies. We have no Tang army in front of us. Chang'an is defenseless. This is the opportunity given by Haotian. If we don't seize it, we will be punished by heaven." A general said, "Even if we attack Chang'an, it will be meaningless. Everyone knows that Chang'an cannot be broken through. What should we do then? There is no city that cannot be broken through in this world." Long Qing did not explain further. In today's world, only a few people, including him, knew the real plan of the West Hill Divine Palace. The Golden Palace's invasion of the South and the world's war against the Tang Empire were just a cover-up or a means to exhaust the Tang army. The West Hill Divine Palace wanted Chang'an to be defenseless. Everything was for the Arai Pestle. The West Hill Divine Palace was confident that they could get the Arai Pestle. The soldiers and civilians of the Tang Empire all thought that Chang'an city could not be breached, so they sent their troops to different places. The West Hill Divine Palace obtained the Arai Pestle and broke the god-stunning Arai. Chang'an city was about to face a massacre. Long Qing gently lifted the reins and walked down the hill. The ears of wheat hung heavily in the farmland. The golden ocean danced in the autumn wind. The scenery was very beautiful. The farmhouses by the fields had already been set ablaze, the black smoke rising and the screams of the Tang could faintly be heard. Long Qing recalled the day he left Chang'an after failing to enter the second floor of the academy many years ago. That day, he saw the beautiful rural scenery of the Tang Empire, the farmhouses painted in various colors, and the peaceful and happy lives of the Tang people. At that time, he vowed that one day, he would return to the Tang Empire and burn everything. It was not out of pity for the Tangs that he ordered the generals to enforce discipline, but because it was necessary for the army to march. In fact, he thought that the scene of being burned and slaughtered was a truly beautiful sight. Long Qing's face, which was not covered by the silver mask, revealed a happy smile. Tens of thousands of coalition troops wreaked havoc in the eastern wilderness of the Tang Empire. No matter how strict the military discipline was, it was impossible to completely follow all orders, not to mention that most of them were undisciplined grassland cavalries. Prince Long Qing's military order was passed down. Most of the grassland cavalries obeyed and followed the military flag to Chang'an city in the west. However, there were still more than 1,000 cavalries left behind. These grassland cavalries believed that with their riding skills, it would not take too long to catch up with the main force in front of them. Therefore, they were not in a hurry to set off. Instead, they were in a hurry to loot everywhere. They had long known that the Central Plains was rich and the lives of the Tang Empire's people were even better. However, it was not until they entered the Tang Empire's territory that they realized how ridiculous their imagination of the Central Plains was when they stood in the wilderness. The wealth accumulated in an ordinary Tang village was actually more than that of a medium-sized tribe on the grassland. Those exquisite silk, gold and silver treasures made them reluctant to leave. Those fair and beautiful women of the Tang Empire made them salivate. Therefore, many of them decided to loot again before the war. Dozens of grassland cavalries from the left king's palace waved the machetes in their hands and rushed into a small village in the Call with sharp whistles and laughter. This small village was far away from the official road and luckily avoided the main force of the coalition troops. The nearby refugees also took the small road to hide here. Now there were more than 100 people in the village. Most of these refugees were old, weak, women and children. As for the men and their families, they had all died in the battle with the grassland cavalries when their village was destroyed. The grassland cavalries gathered all the people and began to search the houses for valuables. However, this village was a bit remote and relatively poor, so they did not gain much. The grassland cavalries were very dissatisfied and angrily scolded something. The old, weak women and children who were gathered in the middle of the village did not understand what these barbarians were scolding. They all lowered their heads in silence. Only an old woman held a little girl in her arms and stared at the grassland cavalries. The little girl was still young and did not know exactly what had happened. But she knew that her home was burned down by the bad guys in the tattered leather clothes. Her father was killed by these bad guys with a bad smell. So her eyes were full of hatred. A grassland cavalries was angry about the little harvest today. Suddenly he saw the girl's hateful eyes and suddenly became angry. He held the machete and walked toward the crowd. He raised the machete in his hand. Several old people in the crowd stood up and scolded angrily, trying to stop him. But the machete had fallen. The little girl was not hacked to death. Because the machete fell on the ground and made a crisp sound. With an arrow lodged in his eye socket, the cavalryman fell stiffly to the ground. The arrow was a bit messy, not like the standard weapon of the Tang army. The grassland cavalries were shocked. They shouted in the barbarian language and quickly got back on their horses. They took down the short wooden bows on their shoulders and looked at the forest behind the village with vigilance. Whoosh! The arrow whistled. An arrow flew out of the forest and hit the shoulder of a grassland cavalry's. Blood spurted out. The grassland cavalries were not surprised. Instead, they were happy. They shouted and urged their horses to surround the forest. Through the characteristics of the arrow, they were sure that the archers in the forest were not regular soldiers of the Tang army. They were more likely to be hunters. A few days ago, many brothers of the tribes were killed by the Tang hunters. The hunters were at most in groups of 2 or 3 people. Once they showed up, how could they be a match for these elite cavalries? Young Urxi hid behind a tree, holding the boxwood bough in his hand tightly. His shoulder was against the trunk and his right foot was gently stepping on the ground. He looked a little nervous. Compared with the time when he left home, he was much thinner and darker. His face was messy and full of beard. There were several bloody cuts on his dry lips. He looked very embarrassed. The sound of hooves gradually came. The grassland cavalries came to surround the forest. He jumped out of the tree, pulled his bow and shot. The arrow left the string and hit the waist of a cavalryman. After confirming that there was only one archer hiding in the forest, 3 grassland cavalries held their short wooden bows and shot continuously. Young Urxi was forced to hide behind the tree and did not dare to poke his head out. The rest of the cavalries surrounded him from the side. From time to time, there was a sound of knocking on the trunk. The bark was splashed and the arrows brushed past his body. The grassland cavalries were very experienced in dealing with the Tang hunters. Young Urxi could not fight back at all. He could only watch the enemy rush out of the forest. Although he was in a desperate situation, he did not show any fear on his face except for a little shortness of breath. At this moment, there was a dense sound of breaking the air. A violent rain of arrows fell from the forest. More than 20 grassland cavalries in the front were suddenly shot like hedgehogs. They fell from their horses and died on the spot with blood all over their bodies. Then there was a loud sound of stepping on grass and rubbing trees. Countless people rushed out from the depths of the forest and killed the grassland cavalries like wolves and tigers. The grassland cavalries who were still alive shouted in shock and anger. Their faces showed fear and they pulled the border rope desperately, trying to turn their horses around and escape. If one could understand the language of the barbarians, he would know that the word shouted by the grassland cavalries was ambush. They thought they were ambushed by the Tang army. More than 100 people rushed out of the forest. Some wore ordinary cotton-padded clothes, and some wore silk shirts. Most of them were dressed like farmers. None of them wore the uniform of the Tang army. These people were a little older and held a variety of weapons in their hands. For example, young Wuxia held a pitchfork, some held a hammer, and most of them held a straight knife. The sharp straight knife was the weapon of the Tang army. Were these people the Tang army or not? They were not the Tang army. They used to be the Tang army. They had retired from the army. Now they were businessmen, bodyguards, and farmers. But when the Tang Empire needed them, they were the Tang army. Young Wuxia smashed a grassland cavalryman from his horse to the ground. Then he strode forward and turned over his hands. The heavy pitchfork drew an arc in the air and fiercely stabbed into the cavalryman's chest. Then he walked forward and stepped on the grassland cavalryman's body with his right foot. Then he pulled out his hands. With a poof, several bloody holes appeared on the cavalryman's chest. This whole set of movements was very smooth and skillful. He must have repeated it many times. Holding the pitchfork, he ran diagonally to a grassland cavalryman who was surrounded by his companions. He was a little annoyed and muttered in his heart that he had to get a knife today. "Get out of the way. Let me do it," he shouted. The grassland cavalryman was already bloody and unconscious. He leaned against a tree and waved the scimitar in his hand purely out of instinct. He had no ability to resist. The Tang soldiers surrounding the cavalryman heard young Wuxia's anxious shout and understood what he meant. They tacitly made way for him and left the enemy to him. Young Wuxia ran to the grassland cavalryman who was dying. He spat into his palm and smashed the pitchfork on him as if he was doing farm work at home. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 734. The ambush on the grassland cavalries was a complete victory. When cleaning the battlefield, young Wuxia, who killed 3 enemies and wounded 2, gained the right to choose the spoils from the dead enemies. The wealth plundered by these cavalries was naturally handed over to the imperial court. The so-called spoils were nothing more than armor and weapons. But the leather armor used by the grassland cavalries was like a tattered fig leaf in the eyes of the former regular Tang army. No one was interested in it, so they could only target those sabers and arrows. Young Wuxia wanted to change his saber. The pitchfork was sharpened and could be used to kill people. After many battles, he was very comfortable with it. But after all, it was a farming tool used for weeding, so it was always a little inconvenient. Before the Tang soldiers left the barracks, they could get the honor of bringing their weapons home by the number of years they had served in the army and their daily achievements. No one would be willing to leave the weapons that had accompanied them for many years. Most people would choose to exchange, and finally it became a tradition of the Tang army. Young Wuxia was famous for his archery in the army, so he chose to take the boxwood bow back to his hometown and leave the saber in the army. Now he found that his companions all took the saber home from the barracks, and he felt a little uncomfortable. So he wanted to change his saber. The 2 grassland cavalrymen who were shot dead at the beginning had lost their sabers. That was why he asked his companion to leave the last one to him. Young Wuxia thanked his considerate companions, picked up the scimitar from the bodies of the grassland cavalries, and twirled it. Although he was still not used to it, he felt it was much better than the pitchfork. With a sharp and good saber, the pitchfork looked a little clumsy and ugly. But after thinking for a long time, he still couldn't bear to throw it away, so he carried the pitchfork on his shoulder and walked into the forest. After a while, he walked out of the woods with a black object swaying on the pitchfork. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it was the cured pork leg that he had brought with him when he left. All that was left was the trotter. His companions watched it for a few days, and finally couldn't stand it anymore. They all laughed. "Wuxia, you should stew the poor pig trotters and eat them, or throw them away. Why do you hang them on the pitchfork all day long?" Young Wuxia wouldn't listen to them, and said, "My wife gave it to you. Eat it slowly. When I pickled it, I used a lot of salt. When I smoked it, I used pine and cypress branches, so it wouldn't go bad." His companions laughed, and absolutely no one had any interest in the poor pig trotters. Young Wuxia felt there was some movement beside him. He turned around and saw a little hand gently pulling the corner of his clothes. It was the little girl who had almost been killed by the grassland cavalries. Looking at the dirty little face, he thought of his daughter, and comforted her, "Don't be afraid. We will drive those bad people away tomorrow." The little girl wasn't here to talk to him, and there was no fear in her eyes. Instead, there was a luster in them, and a stream of saliva flowed down from the corner of her mouth. Young Wuxia followed her gaze and found that she had been staring at the pork trotters hanging on the pitchfork. The little girl. The little girl's eyes kept moving with her looking face, and said. After thinking for a moment, he removed the pig trotter and stuffed it into the little girl's arms. The little girl laughed happily, wiped the saliva from her mouth, and bowed to him to express her gratitude. Then she ran to her grandmother, shouting something as she ran. One of his companions came to young Wuxia and said, her whole family was killed. Only her grandmother and her granddaughter survived by hiding in the cellar. Young Wuxia looked at the little girl's back and said nothing. They left half of their rations for the refugees in the village, and then drew a simple map, telling them that there was a temporary government office of the imperial court in charge of gathering the refugees and retreating 17 miles away in the southwest. After doing these things, they pulled the 20 or so uninjured horses and left the village. The next morning, these retired Tang soldiers met with the main force. "Young Wuxia, you're good. You got a knife so quickly." A cavalryman looked at him and said. Young Wuxia said proudly, "It's nothing. It took me a lot of effort to kill the 3 barbarians. Speaking of which, if it weren't for me not wanting to fight for credit, the 2 who were seriously injured by me would have been on my account." The cavalryman laughed and said, Good. I won't forget to report to the commander and record your credit. Don't forget that I was in the border army in the 2nd year of the Tianqi era. What's with your attitude?" Young Wuxia laughed and scolded him. He carried the pitchfork and followed his companions into the forest. The cavalryman held his horse's belly and came to a hillside along another road. He came to the side of the commander's horse and reported in a low voice the military information he had just received. Lu Si, the commander of the valiant cavalry battalion, nodded solemnly and raised his hand to signal the cavalryman to leave. Then he looked at the middle-aged man beside him and said, "Long Qing sped up and missed us." The middle-aged man was dressed in cyan and looked calm. He was particularly eye-catching among the hundreds of cavalrymen of the valiant cavalry battalion. It was Cao Xiaoshu. Cao Xiaoshu said, Long Qing was too anxious and the defense of the prefecture and county was too weak. Lu Si said, the prefecture and county army could fight on foot, but they couldn't do anything against the grassland cavalry. They fought hard and tried their best. Cao Xiaoshu said, I don't mean to blame them. Among the prefecture and county army, only the Gushan commandery has real combat power. Hua Shangyue did a good job as the commander of the 3 prefectures, but most of his soldiers were transferred to the northern military camp to resist the Golden Tribe royal court from the south. So we can't count on him. Lu Si was a little depressed. He followed Qiao Shaoshu and 800 cavalrymen of the valiant cavalry battalion out of Chang and to the eastern border. It was difficult and dangerous along the way. They also fought with the grassland cavalry several times, but they couldn't fundamentally change the situation. Because they were too few in number, they didn't even dare to meet Long Qing's main cavalry. Qiao Shaoshu said, "Don't think too much. Although they can only harass and chase, at least they can keep the barbarians from being too presumptuous. The people of the eastern border will also suffer a little less." After saying this, he looked at the volunteer soldiers who were gradually disappearing into the forest and said with admiration, "If it weren't for them, the situation would be really unmanageable." There were many people like young Urxi. Many farmers left their fields and their homes. They took their travel expenses, luggage, and the sabers or bows and arrows that they brought back from the army to the distant eastern border. At that time, the imperial court's conscription order had not yet arrived in their hometowns, but they left in advance. Logically speaking, this was not a wise thing to do, because they had no organization and didn't even know where the battlefield was. But this war was different. It was a war that concerned the survival of the Tang Empire. So the news of the invasion of foreign enemies was a military order, a conscription order. If they met a person on the road or in the forest and saw the old saber or bow on his waist, they could confirm that he was a companion, so they could be organized into a powerful force. As for where the battlefield was? Wherever the enemy was, that was where the battlefield was. This was young Urxi's idea, and it was also the idea of his companions. According to the post-war statistics, there were more than 20,000 retired Tang soldiers in the central prefectures of the Tang Empire. Before the conscription order arrived, they volunteered to fight against the invaders at the eastern border. This group of earliest and most lovely counterattackers of the Tang Empire, in the end, less than half of them could return home. My body is exhausted, but my mind is still clear. I am very satisfied with these chapters. I hope you all like them. There will be more tonight. Since I said I would fight with my life, I will naturally fight with my life. Please continue to vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 735. The only one who could save the Tang Empire was the Tangs themselves. For example, young Urxi, General Su Qi, who commanded the Northern Battlefront Army to fight against the Golden Palace for 3 sleepless nights, and the people from Hebei Commandery who braved the cold to transport supplies to the front line. However, courage and a strong will were not enough to overcome the raging tide. Because this war against the Tang Empire, although within the scope of the human world, was about to surpass the level of the human world. In the past years, cultivators who rarely paid attention to worldly affairs all responded to the Divine Hall's letter and joined the war. Even the secluded Xiankong Temple sent their own monk soldiers. On the plateau under the Pamir Mountains in the west of the Tang Empire, Master Qi Mei was walking toward the Tang army's camp. The president of the Hall of Respect of the Xiankong Temple had reached the highest state of Buddhahood. Ordinary weapons in the human world could not hurt him at all. Even the martial arts powerhouses in the Tang army could not stop him. In the face of such an otherworldly sublime person, in addition to courage and will, real power was needed. In the past, there were powerhouses at the peak of martial arts like Su Shi and Xia Ho in the Tang army. But now there was only Su Qi. General Shu Qing in the commander's camp was resourceful and wise, but not famous for his martial arts. Then, who could stop Qi Mei? A scholar in an old cotton-padded jacket appeared out of nowhere. He was covered with dust, but he looked very clean, both physically and mentally. He still had a wooden ladle tied to his waist, but the old book was nowhere to be seen. At this time, the field was in chaos. When the scholar appeared, it was like a warm spring breeze blowing through everyone's heart. The chaotic camp suddenly became very calm. Few soldiers of the Tang army knew who the scholar was. But for some reason, when they saw him, they felt very peaceful and full of trust. As expected, Qi Mei stopped. Who could stop him? Of course, it was the academy. The real power of the Tang Empire was the academy. Although the scholar looked gentle and seemed to be weak, as long as he stood in front of the Tang army's camp, Chi Mei did not dare to take a step forward. This was real power. Before the Buddha's nirvana, he left countless celestial devices and wisdom, in order to prevent the underworld from invading the human world and suppress the daughter of Yama. The world may not understand, but Xiankong Temple must understand. Why? Eldest brother looked at Master Chi Mei and asked. His expression was very sincere. He was simply and seriously asking for advice. Master Chi Mei was silent for a long time. Then, he softly chanted the name of Buddha and said, "The Buddha underwent nirvana, the headmaster ascended to heaven, and the immovable wisdom king's light fell on the human world. It is hard to go against the will of heaven. This is the proof." Eldest brother was surprised and regretful. He sighed and said, "I see. I didn't expect Master's departure to have such an impact on the Buddhism sect." I guess he didn't expect it either. Master Chi Mei said, "This is also a proof." Eldest brother looked at the struggling ant stuck in the sticky blood in front of the straw shoe. After thinking for a while, he raised his head and said calmly, "The academy would like to have a try." Master Chi Mei said concisely, "I admire you. Please." Eldest brother said, "You are no match for me." If this sentence came from second brother's mouth, no matter how emotionless he was, it would be regarded as an expression of pride. If it came from Ning Kei's mouth, he would definitely deliberately be calm, but he must let the other hear his ridicule and contempt, so that he would be furious. But when he said these words slowly, he was really calm. It was just a simple statement of facts, so that people who heard it could not feel any displeasure at all. "My state is naturally not as good as Mr. First." Master Chi Mei looked at eldest brother and said softly, "But no matter how high Mr. First's state is, it will be very difficult for him to stop me." This high monk of Xiankong Temple also answered very calmly and confidently. The limitless state was an extremely terrifying killing skill for any cultivator with an ordinary body in the world. But for him, who had cultivated to the state of Buddhahood, it was not impossible to deal with. Eldest brother said thoughtfully, "I don't know how to fight. This is indeed a problem." Master Chi Mei said, "Mr. First has surpassed the 5 states and is extraordinary. He can go to the south, the east, or the north to solve the crisis of the Tang Empire. But you came to the west and met us Buddhist disciples. From this point of view, this is probably the result of unpredictable and inviolable God's will." Eldest brother said seriously, "Although I don't know how to fight and you have cultivated to the state of Buddhahood, as long as we fight more times, I think there will be some effect." Master Chi Mei was silent for a moment. He looked at the Tang army's camp behind eldest brother and said, "Mr. First's words make sense. But before you kill me, I can kill everyone in the camp." After saying this, he took a step forward with a firm expression. At this time, he was only 17 steps away from the Tang army's camp. Eldest brother stood before the last step and looked at Chi Mei's firm face. His expression gradually became lonely and he asked, "The Buddhism sect says that mercy is the heart. Master, do you really want to force me to kill people?" Master Chi Mei did not answer him and took another step forward. Eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket trembled slightly. The position of the wooden dipper tied to his belt changed slightly. In the far west of the battlefield, in the Yueluan Kingdom's camp under the Pamir Mountains, a general fell to the ground and died. Cries of surprise could be heard as the crowd gathered around. There were no scars on the general's body. He looked calm as if he was sleeping. Master Chi Mei knew that the other side had already made a move. His left eyebrow slightly raised. He took another step forward. Eldest brother looked at him quietly, the wind ruffling his hair. In the Yueluan Kingdom's camp, an ordinary soldier fell to the ground and died. He killed one person with each step. Chi Mei took a step forward. One person died in the Yueluan Kingdom's camp. Those people died very quickly, so they did not feel pain. There were no scars on their bodies and they did not bleed. No one saw that the back of these dead people's heads were flattened, as if they had been hit by a blunt object. Eldest brother stood where he was and did not move. Only his slightly trembling cotton-padded jacket and the cracks that gradually appeared on the wooden dipper showed what he had done. Eldest brother did not deliberately choose the dead. There were generals and ordinary soldiers. In his view, everyone was equal. So, in the face of death, why should he choose? But obviously, not everyone saw it as he did. Chi Mei was still walking forward. At this time, he was 9 steps away from the Tang army's camp. This also meant that the Yueluan kingdom had to pay the price of another 9 people's lives. The expression on eldest brother's face gradually became solemn. The last 8 steps. The Yueluan kingdom's commander died. The last 7 steps. The successor of the Xiankong Temple's commandment hall died. Master Chi Mei's footsteps became heavier and heavier. It took more and more time to take each step. Before he could take the 6th step, eldest senior brother suddenly said something. The emperor of the Yueluan kingdom is dead. This was the first time that eldest brother had killed someone in the limitless state before Chi Mei took a step. What did this mean? It meant that although there were only 6 steps left, there would be more than 6 people dead. It could be 60. 600. 6,000. Or even more. No matter how benevolent he was, as long as he killed more people, he would eventually not be afraid to kill. Master Chi Mei's feet could no longer move. At this moment, a pair of feet landed on the ground. The feet were wearing very ordinary green cloth shoes. But when they appeared, the soles of the shoes stepped on the ant that had been struggling in the thick blood for a long time. The owner of the green cloth shoes was a Taoist wearing a green Taoist robe. It was quiet. Eldest brother bowed to the Taoist in indigo and said, "The Abbey Dean is late." The Taoist in indigo was the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey, Chen Mao. After the headmaster left the human world, he and the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple were the supreme existences in the world. If he had appeared earlier, eldest brother would not have been able to kill so many people. Eldest brother did not want to kill, so he said he was late. The Taoist in indigo looked at him and said indifferently, "I wanted to see how many people the headmaster's student of benevolence and forgiveness could kill, so I came out late." Eldest brother understood what he meant. Taoism did not care about the life and death of the emperor of Yueluan kingdom. It did not care how many people from the Buddhism sect would die today. Even if the Buddhism sect and the Yueluan kingdom were destroyed, the Taoist in indigo would not care. Eldest brother sighed and said, "It turns out that they all want me to kill people." Then he looked at Master Chi Mei and said with a little pity, "Now do you still think that God's will cannot be disobeyed?" Master Chi Mei was silent. Eldest brother looked at the wooden dipper tied to his waist and looked at the cracks on it. Jun Mo is right. Fighting is to use hard things to hit the weak parts of the enemy. You must use all your strength and not be merciful. Abbey Dean, you did this. He raised his head and looked at the Taoist in indigo. He smiled and said, "Then I finally learned to fight." The Taoist in indigo raised his eyebrows slightly and his sleeves fluttered. There was a thunderous sound in the field. The wooden dipper on eldest brother's waist was nowhere to be seen. Behind Master Chi Mei, countless pieces of wood were scattered. The wooden dipper was broken. Master Chi Mei's head was seriously deformed as if it had been crushed by a mountain. Even if his body became a Buddha, it was now just a crumbling clay Buddha statue. Master Chi Mei fell to the ground. He was seriously injured and could not get up again. Blood slowly seeped out of eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket and dyed his shoulder red. At that moment, he used the first blow after learning to fight on Master Chi Mei. And it was also at that moment that he was almost seriously injured by the Taoist in indigo. The Taoist in indigo looked at him quietly and said, "Your state is not as good as mine. But I didn't expect that on the road of distanceless state, you are walking more steadily than me." Eldest brother said, "Abbey Dean, you have been walking too fast these years. Naturally, it is not stable." The Taoist in indigo suddenly asked, "Rumor has it that you entered the cave profundity in the morning and knowing destiny in the evening. When did you cross the 5 states?" Eldest brother replied, "This time it took a long time. It took me 3 days." The Taoist in indigo was silent for a long time. He put his hands behind his back and shook his head with a smile. His smile was free and easy. Although his hands were behind his back, they were embracing the world. Eldest senior brother remained silent and left. Then the Taoist in indigo left. The first battle of distanceless state in the world began like this. Don't panic, there is still, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 736. A child was smashing stones outside Tile Town. That year, the stone Buddha collapsed and the Lank Temple was destroyed. The Yulon Hungry Ghost Festival was never held again. Naturally, no tourists came to Tile Town, and the stone fish pond by the street had long dried up. The people now mainly relied on the restoration of the Lank Temple to make a living. The monks in the temple were generous, so they had a good life. The stones in the mountains and valleys had become the most convenient toys for the children. At the same time, they were also a good source of income. The stone Buddha was made of good material and could be carved into various small Buddha statues to sell. The child followed his mother's instructions and wanted to smash the 2 stones along the grain. But today was the first time he started this work, so he was very unfamiliar with it. He failed for a long time. He was so angry that he kept wiping his snot and smashing his fists until his fingernails were bleeding. A scholar in a cotton-padded jacket appeared beside him with a bloodstain on his left shoulder. The scholar saw the child smashing the stones and asked for his help. No one knew where he got such great strength from, but the 2 stones collided in the air and were neatly divided into 4 pieces. The child was very happy and thanked the scholar. He wanted to worship him as his teacher. The scholar smiled faintly before disappearing. A moment later, a Taoist in indigo appeared outside the town. He asked the child a few questions, then smiled and disappeared. The child looked at the 4 stones in his arms and was a little confused. He turned and walked into the town. The bell echoed in Chaoyang City. The bell did not come from the White Tower Temple, but from the palace. It was the funeral bell for the death of the king. An old woman was sitting on a stool by the narrow street. Hearing the bell, she rubbed her cloudy eyes and murmured, "What's going on? What's going on?" A scholar appeared in front of the old woman and asked politely, "Can the torn cotton-padded jacket be mended?" The old woman looked at the holes and bloodstains on the left shoulder of the cotton-padded jacket and said angrily, "Where did you go to fight? You're so young, yet you don't learn good things." After the cotton-padded jacket was mended, the scholar left. A moment later, the Taoist in indigo appeared in front of the old woman. The old woman looked at the tear on the lower hem of his clothes and waved her hand. "The material is too good. I dare not mend it." The Taoist in indigo left again. The army of the West Hill Divine Palace had already headed north. Today, the Peach Mountain was quiet and lonely. Only 2 or 3 divine priests walked by slowly. The scholar appeared in front of the shrine and left. The green-robed Taoist then appeared and left again. In this late autumn, the scholar and the Taoist in indigo traveled through the mountains and rivers of the mortal world. One person was in front, and the other was behind. 10,000 miles in an instant was limitless. Every time it appeared, the injury on the scholar's shoulder would worsen. The Taoist in indigo was fine. On a nameless island deep in the South Sea. On the white beach, there was a short wooden stick. Half of the stick was buried in the sand. It looked like an ordinary wooden stick, but it was not ordinary at all. Because its master had left the human world, it was left here, appearing very ordinary. The scholar appeared on the beach and bent down to pick up the wooden stick. The Taoist in indigo then appeared on the beach and stretched out his palm toward the blue sea. A sword flew over from the sea and landed in his hand. The Taoist in indigo asked, "Are you tired after walking for so long?" The eldest brother said, "Compared with the Abbey Dean, I am still young." Then he asked, "Aren't you tired?" The Taoist in indigo said, "I walk faster." The eldest brother said, "The Abbey Dean walks really fast. If I can't find this stick, I really don't know what to do." The Taoist in indigo said, "Even if you find the stick left by the headmaster, you can only hold on for another 7 days." The eldest brother looked at him and said, "It's good to hold on for one more day." The Taoist in indigo said, "Destiny has been decided. Why bother yourself?" The eldest brother said, "There is no destiny in the human world. No one knows what will happen in 7 days." 7 days were enough for the Tang Empire's West Army to defeat the invaders of the Yueluan Kingdom, enough for Ning Ke to control the god-stunning array in Chang'an, and enough for the Academy to do many things. The Taoist in indigo said, "In 7 days, the Academy will no longer exist." The eldest brother said, "The Master is fighting in heaven. We disciples will not let this happen." The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace had already gone to the Academy. According to the calculations of Haotian Taoism, the Academy had no ability to reverse the situation. However, the eldest brother's calm expression seemed strange. The Taoist in indigo paused and said, "You should know where the real attack of Haotian Taoism is." The army of the West Hill Divine Palace was in the south of the Tang Empire, in Xinghe County, outside the Verdant Canyon. The eldest brother said calmly, "I am not as good as Jun Mo, so I am here." The meaning of this sentence was clear. Jun Mo was there. The Taoist in indigo said, "Don't be modest. Although Jun Mo has infinite potential, and even I can't see how far he can go on the battlefield, you are still the strongest eldest brother in the Academy. Your state is the highest and you are the biggest threat to Haotian Taoism, so I am here to watch you." The eldest brother said, "The Abbey Dean is also the biggest threat to the Tang Empire, so I have been waiting for you to watch me. Moreover, the Abbey Dean's state is far above mine, so the Academy has the advantage." Surpassing the 5 states did not mean being invincible. For example, cultivators in the Tianqi state could have almost invincible power after being infused with Haotian's divine flame, but they might not be able to win against the siege of the world. Only the limitless state, which was mysterious and unpredictable, could take the head of a general from 1,000 miles away. It was the most terrifying and difficult to guard against on the battlefield. The Taoist in indigo said, "I can ignore you." The eldest brother showed a rare expression of confidence and said, "You must." The Taoist in indigo said, "Why do you say so?" The eldest brother looked at him and said seriously, "I have learned how to fight. If the Abbey Dean ignores me and doesn't come to watch me, I can kill many people, such as the Great Divine Priest of Judgment, the Great Divine Priest of Revelation, and Yi Su. Except for Lu Bai and the Hierarch, I have no confidence. I can kill the rest." The Taoist in indigo said, "I can also kill many people." The eldest brother shook his head and said, "You know very well that if you can't kill the people in Chang'an and the Academy, then it will be meaningless for this battle." The Taoist in indigo said, "I have said that you can only hold on for 7 days at most. After 7 days, I can kill without restraint." The eldest brother said, "I have also said that there is no fate in the world. No one knows what will happen after 7 days." The scenery in the back of the mountain of the Academy became a fake painting. Everything in the painting seemed to be moving, but in fact, it was not moving at all. It was like the ever-changing lines on a chessboard. In the black and white world of Go, the 2 sides gradually merged and condensed. Then, a large blank space appeared in the middle. At the edge of the blank space, a brave soldier fell to the side. The proud state knight in the middle of the chessboard was covered with dust. Behind the state knight, the carriage was badly damaged and could not move forward anymore, leaving only a deep rut. The scenery gradually came back to life. The silver stream between the cliffs in the distance collided with the pool and made a roaring sound. The woods all over the mountains and fields straightened their waists again. The dozen West Hill Divine Guards beside the carriage were already dead. Countless dense lines appeared on their bodies. But the figure on the carriage was still tall. It broke through the game and was not hurt at all. In a forest somewhere in the back of the mountain, the little white wolf curled up in a cave and kept licking its injured forelimbs. The silk quilt in the cave was dyed red with blood. It looked very sad and pitiful. On the clear stream behind the iron-making room, the big white goose was still sitting on the top of the water wheel. It bent its neck to the sky but did not sing. It looked extremely angry and unwilling. Blood gradually dyed its white belly feathers red. The old yellow bull on the meadow in the distance looked more tired and old. The chessboard under the pine tree on the cliff plateau had been broken into countless pieces. The fifth brother and the eighth brother looked at the broken chessboard on the table and kept silent for a long time. Blood flowed from the corners of their lips. They had suffered serious internal injuries. The two brothers looked at each other without saying anything. They could see the faint regret in each other's eyes. They should not have spent half of their life on the chessboard just because they liked it. If they had learned some fighting skills from their teacher, they would not have allowed the old Hautian Taoism to be so arrogant. The hierarch lord laughed out loud. The thousands of gauze curtains on the carriage trembled uneasily. A wind suddenly rose from the mountain, rustling the pine trees. The flowing clouds crashed into the distant waterfall and broke into pieces. His laughter was extremely heroic and full of spirit. First kill Su Shi, then destroy the academy, then destroy Chang'an. The Tang Empire would no longer exist. Undoubtedly, this would be the peak of his life. But at this moment, a person came from the clouds on the mountainside. It was the third sister of the academy, Yu Lian. She walked slowly on the mountain road. Yu Lian was very petite. She looked very delicate, but her temperament was gentle and mature. If you only looked at her, you would think that she was a girl. If you looked at her eyes carefully, you would think that she was a woman who had seen everything in the world. Looking at her on the mountain road, the hierarch lord's laughter gradually stopped. Miss Third, I know that you are extraordinary. The see-through state is just a means to deceive the world. As long as you want, you can enter the knowing destiny state at any time. So don't be deliberately mystifying here. Yu Lian did not say anything and kept walking. As her footsteps rose and fell, something very strange happened. Her black hair gradually fell below her waist. But it was not her black hair that was growing longer, but she was becoming shorter. Yu Lian walked on the mountain road. With every step, she became shorter. Her originally very delicate appearance became more tender, and finally, she gradually became a 12 or 13 years old girl. Her aura was also changing and improving. As the hierarch lord said, she easily broke through the threshold of the see-through state and entered the knowing destiny state. Looking at the changes of Yu Lian through the gauze curtain, the hierarch lord indifferently said, I said. His voice suddenly stopped. His brows suddenly furrowed. Because after Yu Lian entered the knowing destiny state, her aura was still improving. Walking on the mountain road, she went from the see-through state to the peak of the knowing destiny state. Let me be crazy. Let me be stupid tomorrow. I don't care about tomorrow. I have more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 737. The back of the mountain of the academy had always been mysterious in the cultivation world. Third sister Yu Lian was even more low-key. Not many people knew of her existence. The West Hill Divine Palace knew a little more, but they only knew that she was a powerhouse in the see-through realm. It was also recorded in the hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. But the Lord Headmaster and the other true bigwigs never believed this. The academy was a magical place. The eldest brother learned the Tao in the morning and entered the Tao in the evening. He jumped 2 levels from the no-doubt state to the knowing destiny state in a day. The second brother reached the no-doubt state in 14 days. Yu Lian was the academy's third sister, just below eldest brother and second brother. Even though the second floor of the academy was ranked according to the time of entry, eldest brother and second brother were extraordinary figures. They had suppressed the world wayfarers of the Buddhism and Taoism sects in the autumn rain at the Lank Temple, and forced Lu Bai, the sage of sword, to not dare to draw his sword. How could she be weak? There were also many geniuses in the Tao sect. Yi Su had broken through the close of life and death at such a young age. Yi Hongyu disdained to compete with Chen Pippi for the title of being the youngest to enter the knowing destiny state. She suppressed her cultivation state to the see-through state for several years with great determination and clarity of Taoism. It was not until she reached perfection that she casually stepped over the threshold on the snow cliff, which was similar to the situation now. That was why the hierarch lord was not surprised to see Yu Lian walking slowly on the mountain path and instantly breaking through the see-through realm to the knowing destiny state. Until her aura continued to rise, the peak of the knowing destiny state. The Lord Headmaster's expression finally became serious, but his voice was still dignified and confident. Haotian bestowed upon me the divine power to shepherd sheep in the human world. Before the boundless light, even your two senior brothers are no match for me. Even if you reveal your true strength today, you can only become a sacrifice. The hierarch lord looked at the beautiful girl outside the veil and said, Haotian Taoism respects the headmaster of the academy. For the sake of your teacher, hand over the array I pestle and I will spare your lives. Yu Lian took out an object wrapped in cloth from her sleeve and placed it on a wooden stool by the side of the mountain path. She looked at the giant sedan calmly and said, My eyes are blinding. I'll spare your life for the sake of your stupidity. The sect leader was slightly startled, then he laughed out loud. His laughter shook the layers of gauze and echoed in the quiet back mountain of the academy. You're as short as a little girl, but you sure talk big. The headmaster stopped laughing and shouted, Do you really think you have the ability to defeat me? What a joke. His voice was cold and loud, like thunder in the deep winter. Yu Lian had already walked to the front of the giant chariot. Looking at the tall figure behind the gauze curtain, he smiled and said, You are shorter than me. What right do you have to mock me? The figure on the carriage was clearly so tall and imposing, but she said that he was shorter than her. The Lord Hierarch suddenly fell silent. He stared at the Akiji girl outside the curtain and said slowly, Who are you? The sect leader's voice was extremely solemn, and there was even a hint of uneasiness in it. I've always known who you are, but you don't even know who I am. Everyone says that you and I are the two most mysterious people in the cultivation world. But now it seems that this saying is really laughable. In the quiet back mountain of the academy, a cicada suddenly chirped. The 4 seasons here were all spring, and there was no true autumn. Following the sound of cicadas, autumn arrived. The autumn wind blew, and yellow leaves fell, because these cicadas were autumn cicadas. Under the pine tree, the 5th brother and the 8th brother were a little surprised and suddenly understood. They looked at each other and smiled. Then they bowed to Yu Lian and left the cliff yard quietly. The hierarch's voice became more and more uneasy. He said coldly, Who are you? He heard the cicadas and vaguely guessed something. But he could not believe it no matter what. Yu Lian's aura suddenly became indifferent. Her delicate and beautiful facial features seemed to be covered with a thin layer of frost. She looked extremely mysterious and arrogant. She clearly looked up at the tall figure on the chariot. But it seemed that she was looking down at an ant. An extremely cold voice came from her lips. Xiong Chimo, you damn dwarf, what right do you have to stand higher than me? As soon as she finished, countless cicadas chirped in the back mountain of the academy. Cicadas, cicadas, what did they know? The whole mountain was filled with cicadas' mournful and frightening chirping in autumn. The autumn wind was getting stronger, and the yellow leaves fell. Countless yellow leaves fell on the giant chariot. The chariot was covered with layers of gauze. It was not destroyed in the battle with Su Shi, nor was it damaged after breaking the chess game of the academy. However, it looked so fragile in front of the falling yellow leaves and was torn into countless pieces. The broken gauze flew away, and there was nothing left on the chariot. Few people had seen the real hierarch lord of the divine halls of West Hill. That was why he was called one of the two most mysterious people in the world. At this moment, his real body finally appeared in the daylight. He appeared in the mountains of cicadas. An old Taoist priest appeared on the chariot with a very ordinary appearance. But the old Taoist priest was very special. He was very short, even shorter than a boy of 8 or 9 years old. He was very thin, even thinner than the victims of the famine. He looked like a doll made of several pieces of dry wood. He looked so pitiful and ridiculous. This was the real appearance of the hierarch lord of the divine halls of West Hill. The hierarch was not used to the sunlight. There was a look of panic on his face. Because his secular name, which no one knew, was shouted out by Yu Lian. Because he found that without layers of gauze covering his body, the tall and stalwart figure was no longer there. He became very flustered, like a naked man who was stripped of his clothes, and did not know where to put his hands. The big white goose on the roof of the water cart behind the smithy squawked shamelessly when it saw this scene. Amid the chirping of the cicadas, Yu Lian's aura was still rising. In an instant, she had surpassed the high threshold above the 5 states. Everything was clear. The hierarch lord finally came to his senses. He looked at the girl outside the chariot, and a shrill and angry scream burst out from his dry lips. Lin Wu. 23 years cicada cultivation. You're hiding in the academy. You've become a woman. There were 13 disciples in the back of the mountain of the academy, and the most inconspicuous one was third sister Yu Lian. The other disciples were all peerless geniuses in their own fields, but she seemed to be the only one who did not stand out. She seldom talked to people, and rarely stayed in the back of the mountain. She sat by the east window on the second floor of the old library every day, quietly drawing hairpin-style small regular script. It seemed that nothing in the world could arouse her interest, and it was difficult for her to arouse the interest of others. Not to mention the people in the cultivation world, even Ning Ke and the other disciples sometimes forgot that they had such a senior sister, because she was too quiet and easily forgotten. At this critical moment, eldest brother arranged for the disciples of the academy to go to different places to do what they should do, but left her in the academy. It was not that he was not worried that the academy would be attacked, nor was he like Ning Ke and the empress who gave up Helan City. It was because he believed that as long as third sister was in the academy would be safe. Because she used to have a name, Lin Wu. She was the 23-year cicada cultivation. The headmaster of the academy once said this to his disciples. There was a kind of cicada in the arid land of the far west. It hid in the mud for 23 years, and only woke up when the snow melted and the flood came. It bathed in the mud, dried its wings in the cold wind, and flew into the void. At that time, Chen Pipi was fascinated by it. Eldest brother and second brother smiled and said nothing. Yu Lian was also there, and she cooked a bowl of noodles with vegetables for the headmaster. He was the most talented person in the Devil's Doctrine in the past 100 years. Master Lotus had wholeheartedly wanted him to inherit his mantle. But his father died in the hands of Lotus, so he calmly refused the opportunity. He chose a path that no one had ever walked before. He wanted to practice a unique skill that no one in the Devil's Doctrine had ever succeeded in. He was the youngest and the last suzerain in the history of the Devil's Doctrine. He had a few students who were older than him. He continued to cultivate. Finally, he succeeded, and then he disappeared. From that day on, he became the most mysterious person in the cultivation world. That year, the headmaster met a little girl. The little girl was like a jade carving, extremely cute, but her eyes were extremely calm. Only the headmaster could see the confusion and fear in the deepest part of her eyes. What's there to be afraid of? The headmaster said to the little girl, everything is just the appearance. Is this body so important to you? The little girl understood and bowed with hands folded in front of her chest, looking elegant. The headmaster shook his head. The little girl clumsily put her hands on the side of her waist and bowed. She was very shy. The headmaster nodded with satisfaction. When the Devil's Doctrine was destroyed, the West Hill Divine Palace hunted down the remnants of the devil's doctrine. The little girl was just a little girl. She had no ability to protect herself. She did not know how to live the next 23 years. But she did not beg the headmaster. Because she had her own pride. The headmaster did not wait for her to speak and said, "Come back to the academy with me." The headmaster said it casually, as if she had always been in the academy. From that day on, the headmaster had a female disciple. As more and more disciples entered the academy, she began to be called the third sister. A few years later, there was a female professor in the academy, Yu Lian. The female professor sat by the east window and wrote the hairpin-style small regular script for many years. Cicadas were chirping outside the window. She was very inconspicuous. She did not care about the world, and the world did not care about her. She was the legendary 23-year cicada Lin Wu. What a big fog. The hierarch lord's shocked and angry roar was still echoing in the back mountain of the academy. The roar was like winter thunder, but it could not suppress the chirping of the cicadas. He looked at the young and beautiful girl and said incredulously, "How did you become a woman?" Yu Lian said sarcastically, "How Tian can become a woman, why can't I? If I can't even see through the appearance, how can I cultivate the 23-year cicada cultivation?" If Yi Su was standing in front of me, he would not ask such a stupid question. If he could see through life and death, he could naturally see through these details. The hierarch still could not suppress his shock and said, "Although you are a demon, you are still a suzerain. You are shameless to change your sect and become an outsider's disciple." Yu Lian looked at the sky and said, "The headmaster of the academy is worthy to be the teacher of all ages, let alone me. Also. But it's such a good plot. It's a waste not to call for monthly votes. Vote for monthly votes. In the name of the third sister. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 738. The hierarch stared at Yu Lian and said coldly, "You're the hierarch, but you still want your younger brother to fight with those beasts. Is this what the headmaster taught you?" Yu Lian said indifferently, "Even though you're not as powerful as me, it would take me some effort to kill you. As long as I can exhaust you, it's good enough." The hierarch was so angry that he laughed. He said, "Your two younger brothers almost died. You just wanted to exhaust them and you just stood by and watched. You are really sinister and cold-blooded. If the headmaster knew that you would do this, he would probably regret taking you as his disciple." Yu Lian said, "I'm the hierarch of the Enlightenment doctrine. It's natural for me to be sinister and cruel. Since the headmaster accepted me as his disciple, how could he not know what kind of person I am?" The headmaster shouted sternly, "Then today, I will deal with you on behalf of Haotian, you evildoer of the devil's doctrine." Yu Lian looked calm. Even though her opponent was the most powerful cultivator from the divine halls of West Hill, her calmness was an undisguised humiliation to her opponent. "Xiong Chimo, you were not my match decades ago. Now you're even less likely to be my match." She looked at the hierarch's withered arm and his broken wrist. She said indifferently, "Like I said, if you blind yourself, I'll let you leave the academy." The hierarch's left hand was cut off by General Su Shi at the foot of the Shao Mountain. From the Shao Mountain to the back of the mountain of the academy, he had gone through 2 tough battles. Then he faced the most unfathomable person in the devil's doctrine, the 23-year cicada cultivation with the headmaster for many years, but he was still confident. The hierarch suddenly became serious. He raised his right fist, lowered his waist and took a deep breath. Then he punched. He was very thin and short, so his fists were also very small and looked a little ridiculous. But it was not ridiculous at all since it could kill Su Shi and suppress the divine halls of West Hill for many years. It was a terrifying fist. It was an ordinary fist, but it seemed to gather all the chi of heaven and earth in the back of the mountain of the academy. Between his fingers, there was a pure white light, as if he was holding a sun in his fist. Yu Lian looked at the fist and suddenly lowered her head. The cicadas in the back of the mountain were more agitated and sad. The two most mysterious cultivators in the cultivation world had finally met and fought. The wind from the fist was furious. The fist was as heavy as a mountain. The power of the fist was like the sea. The bluestone slabs on the mountain path were flipped open like pieces of paper and flew far away. Trees collapsed one after another. The strong trunks only bent, but most of the big trees were directly snapped, making countless cracking sounds. Yu Lian was not hit. Her body was like a cicada's wings, drifting away in the forest with the wind. It was as if she had really integrated with the breath of heaven and earth. It was impossible to find her. The cries of the autumn cicadas continued, and thousands of yellow leaves rustled down. Thousands of tears appeared on the sect master's divine robe. Then, an extremely thin layer of light appeared on the surface of his body, and the yellow leaves were instantly shattered into threads. The most powerful man in the West Hill Divine Palace finally calmed down. He looked at the broken trees and gravel in the valley and shouted, 23-year cicada cultivation. Do you really think that you are invincible just because you have surpassed the 5 realms? You've entered the sky demon realm at most. Since you can't be immortal, how can you fight against light? He slowly raised his hands, the remaining palm of his right hand facing the sky. His expression was abnormally firm and persistent. His voice was like a burst of spring thunder, spreading to the surroundings and the sky. Haotian, please give me strength. The sonorous voice was still floating in the air when the sky reacted. The setting sun in the west suddenly became bright. It was no longer red and warm. Instead, it seemed to be supreme, causing people to feel reverence in their hearts. A majestic power passed through the sunset clouds in the sky, ignoring the gathering array that covered the back of the mountain of the academy, and fell on the hierarch's body along with the blazing sun. The hierarch's thin and short body suddenly became extremely tall. His body seemed to have a terrifying power that was close to the way of heaven. In just a breath, the falling yellow leaves were blown up into the sky and dared not to fall again. Even the cries of the cicadas in the mountain seemed to be quieter at this moment. The hierarch finally used the divine skill of Tianqi. Yu Lian's figure appeared outside the forest. Her innocent face finally showed a trace of solemnity. She was confident in the battle above the 5 realms, but she had no experience. In fact, all the powerhouses who had fought above the 5 realms, except those in the limitless state, had returned to Haotian's divine kingdom, which meant death. She looked at the light beam falling from the west and suddenly smiled. She reached out her right hand, as if picking up a pen. She used the non-existent pen to write a few hairpin-style small regular script in the air. Calm your heart, concentrate, ignore the world, don't ask about the way of heaven, and just immerse yourself in your own world. That is your own world. The headmaster said this to her years ago. There seemed to be a transparent barrier in the sky of the back of the mountain of the academy, like the wings of cicadas. The light beam falling from the west fell on the barrier, and most of it was refracted and sprinkled on the human world. This was Yu Lian's world, and she refused to let Haotian's divine light enter. Arrogant fool. You think you can block Haotian's divine light by creating another world? Don't forget that this is Haotian's world, and your world will always be below Haotian. The hierarch shouted angrily, and continued to welcome Haotian's divine light. Yu Lian looked at him and said, stupid, now the evil heaven is fighting with the headmaster, and it can't even take care of itself. How can it always care about your life? Don't forget that in its eyes, you are worse than a dog. As she spoke, she had already let go of the pen in her right hand, and her 5 fingers were like blooming chrysanthemums. A very faint aura came from her fingertips, and spread throughout the back of the mountain of the academy. All the trees in the back of the mountain of the academy began to tremble, and all the leaves seemed to be alive. Each leaf was a cicada. The hierarch did not believe what she said at all, but suddenly he found that the setting sun in the west had really dimmed, and became ruddy and peaceful again. He could not help but be shocked. He let out an unwilling scream, and his body disappeared, ready to leave. Yu Lian would not give him such a chance. The hierarch was in the back of the mountain of the academy, among thousands of cicadas. No matter how fast he moved, he was not as fast as the cicadas. He could not leave Yu Lian's world. Thousands of cicadas flew over, making a deafening buzzing sound, and then covered the surface of his body, including his face, and looked extremely terrifying. One of the autumn cicadas slightly flapped its wings. The hierarch's right eye was blind. More than a dozen autumn cicadas danced. The hierarch's right hand was broken. A shrill scream came from thousands of autumn cicadas. His left hand was cut off by Su Shi at the foot of the Shao mountain. His right hand was cut off at the back of the mountain of the academy. Only his bare wrists were left of his fists. He hugged his arms. The light that was previously held in his fists, and the light that Haotian sprinkled on him, were all poured into the embrace between his arms. There was a bright light in front of him, as if a round sun was born. The sun exploded. Thousands of cicadas fluttered and scattered. One of the cicadas fluttered back. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the hierarch, who was covered in blood, rolled away like a stray dog. Yu Lian's figure appeared again, with blood flowing from the corner of her mouth, and a strong smile. The peak battle of Haotian Taoism and the Devil's Doctrine. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace lost an arm, was blind, and the Snow Mountain was destroyed. No matter how powerful Haotian Taoism's divine skill was, it could not cure his serious injuries, and thus he became a useless person. The Devil's Doctrine's Grandmaster, 23-year Cicada, 1. She was the first female disciple of the headmaster of the academy. The academy was still invincible. Not today. Similarly, there is a separate chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 739. The little white wolf came out of the hole with a white cloth wrapped around its injured leg. The big white goose wobbled over from the stream. The old yellow bull opened his eyes. Fifth brother and eighth brother had returned to the cliff yard. Yu Lian took out a wooden comb from her sleeve and combed her messy hair carefully. Then she tidied up her clothes and put the comb back into her sleeve after confirming that there was no problem. The old yellow bull slightly lowered his head. The big white goose and the little white wolf leaned forward. Fifth brother and eighth brother greeted them with hands folded in front. Yu Lian returned the greeting solemnly. The autumn wind stopped and the autumn cicadas were quiet. The academy was still the same. Be careful, senior sister. Song Qian said. I'll leave the academy to you, fifth brother. Yu Lian picked up the thing wrapped in cloth from the mountain road and walked out of the academy. Ning Ke left the princess mansion and went to the street, ready to go to the academy. Although there were many things to deal with in Chang'an, he was going to the academy to get the array pestle, and he was worried about the safety of the academy. You don't have to go. A young girl appeared in front of him and handed him an item wrapped in cloth. Ning Ke was very surprised. Because he recognized the cloth. It was a cheap cloth bought by Sang Sang at the East Gate Market. He used it to wrap the array pestle of the God-stunning array. So this cloth was the array pestle. He took the array pestle and looked at the girl in front of him. His eyes showed vigilance and then became confused. He was sure that he had never seen her before, but he felt that he had seen her somewhere before. With a pair of black ponytails and a beautiful face, this 12 or 13-year-old girl could be called a girl or a little girl. She was on the dividing line. Ning Ke looked into her eyes and saw her calm expression. He finally guessed who she was and could not help but be shocked speechless. He even almost threw away the array pestle. Yu Lian used the simplest words to describe what happened in the academy, especially the battle with the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. She mainly said that the hierarch was very short. It was only then that Ning Ke realized that the tall and majestic figure in the eyes of hundreds of millions of Taoism believers was actually just an illusion. The hierarch lord turned out to be a damn dwarf. Back in the wilderness, when he shot 5 people with the primordial 13 arrows, both the great divine priest of revelation and Yi Hongyu had a hard time withstanding it. However, the hierarch did not even try to dodge. The scene at that time brought great pressure to Ning Quebec. He thought to himself, no wonder he's the most powerful cultivator in Haotian Taoism. He can even deal with the primordial 13 arrows so easily. Only now did he understand that it was because the sect leader was very short and he was aiming at the figure. The iron arrow flew over the man's head, so naturally there was no need to dodge. Why did you let him live? Ning Ke gradually calmed down from the shock and asked. Some people are more useful alive than dead. Yu Lian said, many years ago, when Xiong Chumo was still young, he went to the wilderness with the seniors of Haotian Taoism. I was still young, so we fought when we met. I destroyed the snow mountain in his lower abdomen and made him immortal. Unexpectedly, it was a blessing in disguise. He devoted himself to cultivation and became what he is today. However, people with abnormalities always have some psychological problems. Now that he is disabled, you don't have to worry about him. Instead, the people in the West Hill Divine Palace will have a headache. Just like the hierarch and many other bigwigs in Haotian Taoism, Ning Ke never thought that third sister was just a cultivator in the see-through state. Therefore, he was not surprised to know that the academy was still under her protection. It was not until now that he finally realized that the one who was defeated by third sister was not an ordinary cultivator, but the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace. Who in the world could defeat the hierarch lord? Ning Ke was shocked after knowing the answer. Third sister was the grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine, 23-year cicada cultivation. Among the disciples on the second floor of the academy, third sister, Yu Lian, was the first one he knew. They even knew each other when they went to the old library before they exchanged letters with Chen Pippi. Over the years, he did not talk much with Yu Lian. But she would always give him advice at important moments. And it started when he was still an ordinary student before he entered the back mountain. Therefore, Ning Ke had always respected third sister, even more than eldest brother and second brother. Walking on the long and narrow stairs of the city wall, Ning Ke could not help but glance at Yu Lian after a few steps. Looking at her young face and the swaying ponytails behind her, it was hard for him to adapt to what he saw. Is there a flower on my face? Yu Lian asked. Ning Ke said with a smile, I just want to look at you a little longer. You are a famous person. Yu Lian smiled. Ning Ke said, no wonder the headmaster refused to accept Tang Xiaotang as his disciple. It's because of seniority. So I am 1 generation older than Tang? Yu Lian said, if we count from the founding father of the Enlightenment doctrine, you are dozens of generations older than him. Ning Ke praised again, the third sister of the second floor is the 23-year cicada cultivation. Yu Lian slightly raised her eyebrows and said, it's just a coincidence. The headmaster doesn't care about these little tricks. Ning Ke said, maybe the headmaster likes these things. As they were talking, the senior sister and junior brother had already reached the top of the Chang and city wall. Ning Ke thought of something and took out an ID token from his belt. The ID token was not made of gold, wood, or stone. It was pure white with a black pattern carved in relief. Judging from the fresh marks on the edge, it seemed to be carved not long ago. The black pattern was a statue. The pure white periphery was like a bright light. Because the statue was facing away from the light, its face and body were immersed in deep shadows, looking very gloomy. Ning Ke asked, this ID token was given to me by senior sister before I went to the wilderness. What is carved on it? Yu Lian walked to the edge of the city wall and looked down at Chang and city. She said, Yama, or Haotian. Ning Ke walked to her side and followed her gaze down. He said, what ID token is this? Yu Lian said, the ID token of the master of the Enlightenment doctrine. The desolate did not hesitate to exterminate their entire race to protect me and Sang Sang. I have never understood why. Now it seems that it's because of this ID token. In the front gate of the Enlightenment Doctrine, Lian Sheng's last attack failed. Now I think it's also because of this ID token. If I think about it carefully, this ID token has saved me many times, but I didn't investigate it. How stupid of me. Ning Ke naturally put the waist token back into his belt and did not intend to return it to Yu Lian. Then, he solemnly bowed to her to express his gratitude. What he did not understand was why third sister would so casually give such an important ID token of the master of the Enlightenment Doctrine to him when he led the students of the academy to practice in the wilderness. Do you remember what I said to you when you were preparing for the opening test? Yu Lian asked. At that time, Ning Ke was just an ordinary student of the academy. He was preparing for the opening of the second floor of the academy. He was under great pressure and had a conversation with Yu Lian in the Sword Forest. I remember. Senior sister said that she would introduce a powerhouse who was not weaker than Lu Bai to be my teacher. That's right. Who was she going to introduce? Myself, of course. Yu Lian said, your ocean of qi and mountain of snow was a mess at that time, and it's still a mess now. Besides, your talent in talisman Taoism has not shown yet, so you are not suitable for cultivation at all. However, your bones are clear and you have amazing perseverance. You are a good candidate for the Enlightenment Doctrine's martial arts. I was tempted and wanted to pass on my mantle to you. Ning Ke only then realized what he had missed back then. Yu Lian said, although you rejected me, I always felt that you would definitely walk on this path in the future. So I gave you this ID token before you went to the wilderness. Just as I expected, you met Lotus in the front gate and learned youngest uncle's great spirit, but you still joined the devil. Yu Lian looked at him and said, Lotus wanted to pass on his mantle to me, but I rejected him. I wanted to pass on my mantle to you, but you also rejected me. Finally, you still inherited his mantle. It seems that there is no difference between us. Ning Ke could not help but feel a lot of emotions when he thought of the past. Then he smiled and said, that's good. Otherwise, I would be inferior to senior sister. Then he gradually stopped smiling and said, is it really fate? I once told you that as long as you start from your own heart, you can easily overcome it. This not only refers to the checkpoints on the way to the mountain, but also something like fate. Yu Lian said, on the first day I met my teacher, he told me this. He also said that I looked better as a girl and that I should accept him. So I put his words into practice on the spot and stepped on the hem of his black smock. Ning Ke asked, and then? Yu Lian said expressionlessly, I didn't overcome it, but my teacher fell flat on his face. Ning Ke felt it was very exciting and asked, how do you feel? Yu Lian thought for a while and said, I feel very good. Ning Ke asked, teacher wasn't angry? Since I'm a girl, I naturally have the right to throw a tantrum. Yu Lian's face was still expressionless. After a moment of silence, she continued, I naturally understood later. I was very depressed at that time, and my teacher deliberately fell to make me happy. It was quiet on the city wall for a long time. Yu Lian looked down at Cheng and City and asked, what problem did you see? Under the current tense situation, no matter how shocking or nostalgic it would not make Ning Ke and her waste so much time to discuss it. They were here to see the scenery. Yu Lian took him to see the scenery of Cheng and City. Ning Ke looked at the city that was more deserted than usual, looked at the wide and quiet streets, and said something very strange, Cheng and City is a bit congested now. Yu Lian said, yes, the problem you need to solve now is this congested word. Ning Ke said, it should be very difficult to solve this congested word. At this time, Cheng and City streets were wide and there were few people, and it was rare to see a few horse carriages. The traffic was very convenient and relaxed. There were no accidents caused by horse carriages colliding, and there were no groups of students who petitioned a few days ago. But Yu Lian and Ning Ke both saw the congested Cheng and City. They looked very serious. I didn't wake up until almost 1:00 in the morning. I didn't dare to slack off, but I found that I really couldn't stand it anymore. I have blurred vision, shoulder pain, and hand cramps. But it's the last day. I have to be perfect. Let's continue. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 740. Yu Lian said, although Haotian Taoism is useless, they still have some tricks up their sleeves. They have been preparing for 1,000 years. Although they can't break the array left by the headmaster, they can't be underestimated. The hierarch entered the academy to grab the array pestle. He Mingqi must have done something in the city in the name of the South School of Haotian Taoism. Fortunately, the array pestle is still in our hands. Ning Ke was puzzled and asked, why didn't you kill He Mingqi? I have to guard the academy. Yen Sei is dead and the headmaster is gone. The God-stunning array will automatically activate. If I show my state before he does anything, I will have to fight with the vermilion bird to death even if I am not killed. Ning Ke thought of the stone statues on the Vermilion Bird Avenue and finally understood. When he fought with Sheho Shuehu, so many powerhouses entered Chang'an. They were allowed to enter. Yu Lian glanced at the array pestle in his hand and said, now the array pestle is in your hand. You have to restore the array to its original state as soon as possible. Ning Ke could tell that senior sister was going to leave. He was a little surprised. He thought that Chang'an could not afford to leave a real powerhouse like senior sister, unless she was going to. Senior sister, are you going to the south? He asked. Yu Lian said, Jun Mo and the others are there. Why should I go there? Ning Ke thought about how terrifying the West Hill Divine Palace army from Qinghe Prefecture was. How could second brother stop them? He was even more worried when he thought of second brother's unyielding pride. Yu Lian said, it's no use worrying. I have to stay in Chang'an because there is something important waiting to be done. So you have to finish it in 7 days. This thing referred to the restoration of the God-stunning array. But what was the important thing? Ning Ke felt a little heavy on his shoulders and asked, why 7 days? Yu Lian said, because eldest brother can only stall the Abbey Dean for 7 days. Ning Ke asked, then where are you going during these 7 days? What are you going to do? Yu Lian said, I'm going shopping. I haven't gone shopping for years. Ning Ke was speechless as he looked at the young girl walking down the stone steps. He looked at her bouncing youthfulness and the 2 black ponytails swaying behind her. After knowing that the third senior sister was the 23-year cicada cultivation realm, he had a very serious question, but he didn't dare to ask her. Should he call her third senior sister or third senior brother? At this time, he was no longer confused, it was still third senior sister. It wasn't because she was young and pretty, it wasn't because she was jumping around, it wasn't because her black ponytail was swaying, it was because at this time, she still wanted to go shopping. Yu Lian was really shopping. The chaos in Chang'an had just subsided. Traces of unwashed blood could still be seen on the streets and alleys. The ruins of the burnt mansions were even more striking. However, with the Empress's strong hand and the full cooperation of the court officials, the order had returned to normal. That history would never repeat itself. The people in the city silently waited for the final battle. Yu Lian was very satisfied with the quietness of the street and the opening of the shops. Or she was satisfied with the woman who made the city go back to normal as soon as possible. She went to Chenjinji Cosmetic Store to buy a box of cosmetic powder and some sweet and sour food. Carrying large and small bags, she casually walked into the palace as if she was visiting a relative. Although the palace guards were vigilant, they didn't notice someone like the 23-year cicada cultivation realm. Now that the God-stunning array had some problems, the beasts on the eaves of the palace could only watch the petite girl carrying a lot of things through the imperial garden to the palace. The empress was not in the imperial study or the main hall. Instead, she was dealing with state affairs in her bedroom. She looked a little tired, but her expression was still firm. It was with this temperament that she could make the Tang Empire feel refreshed within half a day in such a chaotic situation, and when most of the officials in the court were still hostile to her. The curtain in the hall moved slightly. The Empress put her brush pen on the inkstone and looked out of the hall. She said in a low voice, "Who's hiding?" The eunuchs and maids who were serving her looked at each other. They didn't hear any footsteps at all. Was the Empress so nervous and tired that she had an illusion? At this moment, a clear and dignified voice came from outside the hall. It was difficult for a clear and young voice to be dignified, but this voice did it. "It seems that you've had a good life after marrying that guy. You didn't even want to cultivate for a day. If you worked a little harder, you would have found out when I came to the Imperial Garden. You wouldn't have to wait until now." The curtain moved again, and Yu Lian walked in with a lot of things. Compared with the pile of things, she looked even more petite. The Empress frowned slightly and asked, "Who are you?" Yu Lian ignored her. She threw the things on the ground and walked over with her hands behind her back. One put her hand down, and the other put her hand behind her back. These two simple actions caused her aura to change greatly. As she walked, she gave off the feeling of a towering mountain, as if she was a grandmaster. The determined look on the Empress's face turned into confusion, and then she suddenly became very weak, as if she had gone back to many years ago. She was still a timid girl, and her voice trembled slightly. "Are you teacher?" 23-year cicada cultivation had several disciples when he was in the Devil's Doctrine. Those disciples were all older than him. One of them was the last saintess of the Devil's Doctrine, named Summer. She was the current empress of the Tang Empire. The empress didn't know that her teacher had been in the back of the mountain of the academy until today. She couldn't help but be surprised. His Majesty has a very close relationship with the academy. Why didn't he tell me? No one knows my real identity except for teacher, eldest brother, and Jun Amo. Your man naturally doesn't know either. Speaking of which, your man is really good. You didn't suffer a loss marrying him. Teacher, what can you do even if you suffer a loss? If you suffer a loss, even if I can't do anything, I can ask the headmaster of the academy to help. When His Majesty married me, the academy finally agreed. Did you help him? The academy never cares about marriage. I don't have to say anything, and I won't object to your marriage. The long-separated teacher and disciple were talking, and the empress was serving tea and fruits humbly. But Yu Lian looked like a girl at this time, and the scene looked a little weird. So when Tang Xiaotang walked into the bedroom with the sixth prince and saw this scene, she was immediately shocked. Yu Lian glanced at her and said, "No need to guess, it's me." Tang Xiaotang screamed and said, "Teacher, what's wrong with you?" The empress smiled and said, "No wonder Miss Xiaotang appeared and stayed with us after Ning Ke entered Chang'an. It was all arranged by you, teacher." Yu Lian said, "You two have officially met each other today. Greet each other." Tang Xiaotang stepped forward and bowed, and the empress bowed back. The empress was silent for a long time. Finally, she couldn't hold back her doubts, mainly because she was too shocked. She whispered, "Teacher, how did you change? I thought you could hold it back forever." Yu Lian said, "What's there to be interested in? I'm leaving." The empress was speechless. She thought, "You suddenly changed from a man to a woman. How can I not ask?" She stood up and walked Yu Lian to the door of the hall. Yu Lian carried a lot of things and said, "No need. It's not convenient for you to leave the palace." The empress thought, after all, the palace is different from home. "I really can't send you out of the palace." She smiled and asked with concern, "Teacher, have you been happy these years? It's good to be peaceful." "I can't find anything particularly happy. I only remember that one year, teacher explained the 23-year cicada cultivation to the disciples. His words were full of praise and I was very happy to hear it." Yu Lian was silent for a moment and said with a smile, "That night, I cooked a bowl of vegetable noodles for teacher." Ning Ke walked to the Chow mansion on Spring Breeze Pavilion Street. After all, Li Huiyuan was killed by him. It would be inappropriate for him to stand in the court or sit behind the bead curtain like the empress. Therefore, he was contacting the palace through the Chow mansion. Earlier, the Fish Dragon gang sent the latest news from the palace. The imperial court had ordered the southern army, which was heading north, to detour around Shao Mountain and turn southeast to Qinghe Prefecture. The last Yulin royal guards in Chang and was also ready to go. They would leave the city at dusk and rush south overnight. Through this news, he confirmed that the empress had already known the news of the academy's action. The imperial court had begun to cooperate with them. He also felt that this arrangement was appropriate. The greatest danger that the Tang Empire was facing now came from three places. The Golden Palace from the wilderness to the south, the Divine Hall Coalition Army from West Hill and South Jin Kingdom to the north, and the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey, who could be called the most powerful person in the world after the headmaster left. Although the Golden Palace in the north was powerful, the northern army was almost at full strength with the Tang army that Ning Ke and the empress brought back from Helan City. The current situation seemed difficult and bloody, but they were on the Tang Empire's land and General Su Qi was in charge. As long as they could get through the difficult period at the beginning, they would be able to hold on in the end. When the situation was eased, they could even launch a counterattack. What really worried Ning Ke was the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey and the situation in the south. What kind of person was the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey? The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was too powerful. There were more than 1,000 cultivators, but there was almost no soldier in the south of the Tang Empire. In the past years, he had blind faith in eldest brother and second brother. However, in the current situation, that faith had long disappeared. Especially in the south. Facing the mighty West Hill Divine Palace Army, second brother had to hold on for 7 days. Because it would take the southern army and the Yulin Royal Guard 7 days to reach the south. Eldest brother could only hold on for 7 days, so he had to repair the big array of Chang and city within 7 days. The final victory would be decided within 7 days. After 7 days. I'm really tired. This is the slowest speed in 3 days. But it seems to be getting better. I should write more energetically next. I've written this chapter for 7 days, it feels like I'm advertising for the Lien Sua Hotel. But I'm really a 7-day member. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 741. There were 4 key points in the war against the Tang. 2 were in the light and 2 were in the dark. The 2 in the dark were arranged by Haotian Taoism. The 2 in the light were in the north and south of the map. The West Hill Divine Palace Hierarch's surprise attack on the academy failed miserably. The Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey and eldest brother were still wandering around the famous mountains and rivers in the human world, but they would never forget to return. The fierce battle between the Golden Palace and the Tang Empire's cavalry was still going on in the north. So the battlefield that could change the stalemate and decide the outcome was in the south. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was the real main force in the war against the Tang Empire. After the Tang Empire's navy was destroyed, more than 8,000 papal cavalrymen, who had been secretly trained by the Divine Hall for many years, and more than 100,000 troops from the South Jin Kingdom crossed the Great Swamp and entered Qinghe County. In Qinghe County, the powerful cultivators and private armies of the warlords joined the coalition army. Troops from remote small countries and cultivation sects hidden in the mountains also gathered. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army's momentum grew. They walked on the field, the autumn rice was broken and the paddy fields were trampled dry. Behind the 2 divine sedans, there were more and more carriages. The most eye-catching one was the quietest one. This was probably the most powerful army since the Tang Empire's northern expedition against the desolate Man Empire. Compared to today's coalition army, the coalition army that fought against the desolate man in the wilderness in spring was much weaker. At that time, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was personally led by the Hierarch Lord. However, anyone who could guess who was sitting in the quiet carriage thought that the person in the army was more awe-inspiring than the hierarch lord. One day in late autumn, the mighty West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army passed through Qinghe County and came to a green mountain range. They stopped outside the Green Canyon in the mountains. More than a dozen scouts from the South Jin Kingdom galloped towards the verdant canyon. Not long after, there was a sharp sound of bamboo flutes, indicating safety. The coalition army still did not move. The silence was terrifying. The Divine Hall Coalition Army only confirmed that there was no ambush by the Tang Army when the sound of the bamboo flute came from the depths of the verdant canyon and was about to disappear. The commander of the coalition army, Marshal Bai Haixin of the South Jin Kingdom, waved his hand indifferently. The messenger beside him held the flag in both hands and quickly waved it in front of him, conveying the military order to advance to the camps. According to the intelligence from the Tang Empire, the Divine Hall Coalition Army had confirmed that the Tang Empire could not find a single troop to defend the southern border. In the past, the Tang Empire's southern army had been guarding outside the primeval forest. Even if they ignored the invasion of the Golden Tribe royal court, they would have to go around the Shao Mountain to get here. Unless the southern army could fly, it was impossible for them to appear in the verdant canyon. Even so, Marshal Bai Haixin and the important figures of the deity's Templar remained vigilant and cautious. Now that the crushing momentum of the army had been established, they only needed to safely head north to conquer the world. There was really no need to take any risks. The cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom entered the canyon first, keeping a good distance between the battalions. Then the mixed infantry entered. Because the speed was strictly controlled, it took a long time. The reason for this was that the coalition army had to lengthen the formation of the cavalry in the canyon. This would make it easy for the Tang army to attack them together, but it was also good for the cavalry to adapt. If there was really the Tang army in the canyon, the Tang Empire would have to use at least 100,000 troops to defeat all the nearly 20,000 cavalry and infantry that had entered the canyon. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was precisely aware that the Tang Empire did not have so many troops. In the face of the mighty coalition army, the Tang army in guards in the valley did not exist. Even if there were the prefectural army from the north or the militia that gave the grassland cavalry a headache in the eastern border, they would not be able to do anything. The coalition army entered the canyon very slowly. It was so slow that many people in the camp were a little anxious. Some cultivators from some cultivation sects were even angry. However, some people still felt that it was too fast. It's too fast. Let the South Jin people slow down a little more. It was a sunny day with no clouds in the blue sky. The blazing sun did not feel like autumn at all. It penetrated the layers of gauze on the sacred sedan and fell on Yi Hongyu's eyebrows, making her look even more beautiful. The deacon in black beside the sedan received the order and left. After a while, he came back and reported respectfully in a low voice, "Great Divine Priest, Bai Haixin, please rest assured. There are martial arts cultivators going up the mountain. According to the report, there should be no problem." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly. She knew that the coalition army was right. There were no loopholes in their plan and the Tang Empire could not find any chance. If they wanted to make the verdant canyon a graveyard to bury the army, even all the divine talisman masters in the world could not do it. It meant changing the world, and that was something that only Haotian could do. But she still felt that something was wrong. Because everything was too smooth and peaceful. She had lived in Chang'an for a long time. Apart from Ning Ke, who was an atypical Tangs, she had contact with many Tangs. She knew that the Tang Empire would never surrender. Therefore, this smoothness and peace revealed a bit of strangeness. As if to prove that her feeling was correct, the verdant canyon suddenly changed. Countless auras of heaven and earth gathered from all directions and condensed above the mountain. Yi Hongyu's expression suddenly froze. The great divine priest of revelation frowned deeply. There was a slight sound of surprise in the carriage. The three most powerful bigwigs in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army were the first to feel the danger. But it was too late for them to do anything. Even if they could not change what was happening in front of them. The aura of heaven and earth above the verdant canyon fluctuated too violently, far beyond what cultivators could imagine. It was even comparable to the heaven-splitting sword of the headmaster in the wilderness. The amount of the aura of heaven and earth was so great that the streams in Qinghe Prefecture became turbid. Dewdrops condensed on the black roof tiles. Suddenly, a layer of cloud appeared in the sky above the green mountain. That piece of cloud violently twisted, unceasingly accumulating energy, and then suddenly turned into countless threads, dissipating in the blue sky, a power that did not belong to the human world, crushing towards the ground. There was a loud bang. The earth shook uneasily. Countless horses panicked and neighed. The verdant canyon collapsed. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army had been guarding against the Tang Army or the cultivators of the Tang Empire in the verdant canyon. However, no one expected that it was not people who attacked. It was the verdant canyon itself that attacked. The beautiful verdant canyon became the most terrible place in the world. Countless plumes of smoke rose from the canyon and floated up to the blue sky. It was not a fire in the canyon, but the smoke and dust caused by the collapse of the cliff. It was easy to imagine the situation inside if the smoke and dust could float so high. Countless heavy rocks rolled down and landed on the heads of the South Jin Kingdom's cavalrymen, making a dull thundering sound. Then, they continued rolling forward with blood and crushed corpses. The dull thunder-like sounds did not stop for a long time. The smoke and dust caused by the collapse of the canyon became more and more dense. Gradually, it became a large cloud of dust, covering the scene in the canyon. The screams of the South Jin soldiers came from the canyon. Their howls were drowned out by the sound of the cliff collapse. People outside the canyon could not hear them at all. They gradually weakened and then became dead silent. It had been a long time since the collapse of the verdant canyon. The rocks that were even larger than the carriages finally stopped rolling. The shaking plains also calmed down. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army on the field of Qinghe Prefecture was silent. Everyone's face was full of shock and fear. Bai Haixin's face was extremely pale, and his hand holding the reins could not stop trembling. At this time, there were as many as 20,000 South Jin soldiers buried in the canyon. Although these losses could not change the strategic situation and did not fundamentally weaken the strength of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, it still pained him and he could not accept it. He was the commander-in-chief of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, but he was also the leader of the South Jin Army. The 20,000 soldiers under his command had died without even seeing the enemy. In the divine chariot, Yi Hongyu's eyelashes trembled slightly. Her expression became extremely solemn and even a little fearful. She forced herself to calm down and smoothed the wrinkled front of her divine robe of judgment. Her Taoist heart was firm and fearless. This kind of emotion should not have appeared on her, no matter how strong her opponent was. However, as she had thought, the collapse of such a long verdant canyon was many times more difficult than Jun Mo of the Academy cutting the Buddha statue in the Lank Temple. Only Haotian had the ability to change heaven and earth. How did the Tangs do it? Who was in that verdant canyon? What exactly happened in that canyon? Compared to the famous Min Mountain, the verdant mountains in the southern field of the Tang Empire were not as steep or towering. However, the surface of the mountains was hard and heavy granite, but most of the interior was limestone. It was very easy to dissolve in the rain, so landslides and rock collapses happened frequently. It was precisely because of this that the Green Mountains were transformed by nature in an exceptionally strange way. The peaks were steep and strangely shaped, making it extremely difficult to climb. Even martial arts cultivators regarded it as a dangerous path. Fortunately, there was a canyon in the mountains. This canyon connected the central area of the Tang Empire with Qinghe Prefecture. Otherwise, it would take many more days to make a detour. In order to strengthen its control over Qinghe Prefecture, the Tang Empire spent a lot of money to widen the canyon hundreds of years ago. Then, talisman masters and array tactical masters reinforced the cliffs on both sides of the canyon. They also planted trees with developed roots that could absorb water and strengthen the cliffs. Finally, the natural rugged road in the canyon became a smooth official road. From that day on, the Tang Empire became a road connecting the north and the south. People praised that with this strategic road, the Tang Empire and Qinghe Prefecture would never be separated. They would become a real family. Now, the warlords of Qinghe Prefecture rebelled and surrendered to the West Hill Divine Palace. They even sent their private army to join the attack on Chang'an. The country had been divided. Then what was the point of this verdant canyon? So, let it collapse. Bury the past. The term verdant canyon has been in my mind for more than half a year. I've been thinking about it, but every time I think about it, I always think of Lin Qingxia. To be honest, I really don't think Sister Qingxia is as beautiful as many people say she is. Well, the reason why I'm saying this is because I'm really tired. Let's talk about it. There's more to come. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 742. 2 years ago, Ning Ke took Sangsang to the Lank Temple to see a doctor and passed by this verdant canyon. At that time, he thought that since there were countless tactical arrays and talismans set by predecessors in the canyon, if a strong enemy invaded from the south in the future, talisman masters only needed to dispel these talismans to collapse the verdant canyon. Even if tens of thousands of cavalry came, it would be difficult to pass through the verdant canyon and invade the heart of the Tang Empire in a short time. But he immediately denied this idea. Because even if Master Yen Sei came back to life, he could not mobilize so much qi of heaven and earth and trigger the talisman at the same time. As Yi Hongyu thought 2 years later outside the verdant canyon, this kind of earth-changing means was not achievable by human power. Unless the Tang Empire had already done something to these talismans when they opened up the canyon. Now the verdant canyon collapsed instantly, the shaking field that lasted for a long time, and the 20,000 soldiers of the South Jin Kingdom buried under countless boulders all proved Ning Ke's original judgment. Hundreds of years ago, when the Tang Empire opened up the canyon, they did something, and it was a big deal. They directly turned the canyon into a dead land and a tomb. Since the founding of the Tang Empire, they had been guarding against strong enemies from the south. The strong enemies here were not the warlords of Qinghe County, nor the self-proclaimed powerful South Jin Kingdom, but the West Hill Divine Palace. Countless resources and efforts, more than a dozen divine talisman masters, and finally designed by predecessors of the Academy, this important strategic passage was finally turned into an inhuman killing array by the Tang Empire. Then this killing array waited silently for hundreds of years and finally activated, becoming the last barrier of the Tang Empire in the south. If it were not for the large number of West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, which was far beyond the original design of the Academy, the length of the verdant canyon could directly bury the cultivators behind while swallowing the papal cavalrymen of West Hill. No one could survive the collapse of the verdant canyon except for those martial arts powerhouses. In the field outside the verdant canyon, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was dead silent, and their morale was extremely low. The great divine priest of Revelation looked at the green mountain that was still shrouded in dust and fog, and his expression was extremely solemn. Yi Hongyu's eyelashes fluttered a little faster. The two noble great divine priests of West Hill could not help thinking at this time. If they had entered the verdant canyon with the South Jin Kingdom cavalry, would they have survived? Even if they were lucky enough to survive, they would definitely be seriously injured and forced to leave the war against Tang. The methods of the Tang were far too vicious. In the Divine Hall Coalition Army, a voice suddenly rang out in the quiet carriage. Huang He, Mu Chu. I'm sure they're in the mountain now. This is the significance of a divine talisman master to the war. If the old guy Yen Sei is still alive, the Tang Empire's odds of winning this time will at least increase by 1 point. There were 6 disciples of the sword Garrett beside the carriage. One of them had covered his eyes with a white cloth. It seemed that he had a bad eyesight, but he listened to his master's instruction respectfully. Thinking of the terrible scene he had seen, he thought that it was indeed the case. The blind disciple from the sword garret suddenly said, "The sage of calligraphy and his disciple are both divine talisman masters." The man said, "The whole world is against the Tang Empire, but the great river kingdom did not participate. The divine hall did not punish them for the time being, which is to give them some face. Of course, this master and disciple together are not worthy to be mentioned in the same breath as Yen Sei." The smoke and dust in the verdant canyon gradually covered the sky and the light dimmed. After entering the carriage, it became even darker. When the light fell on the eyebrows of the person in the carriage, it revealed a hidden injury under the skin. The hidden injury looked more like a handwriting. It was the handwriting of Master Yen Sei many years ago. There was only one person in the world who had a divine talisman drawn on his face by Master Yen Sei and was still alive. That person was Lu Bai. In the earth-shattering battle by the East Sea of the Kingdom of Song, Yen Sei erased half of Lu Bai's eyebrows, and Lu Bai pierced through Yen Sei's arm with his sword. It seemed that they were evenly matched, but in fact, Lu Bai won. Lu Bai, the visiting professor of the Divine Hall who had been hidden for many years, the most powerful sage of sword in the world, finally came. Sure enough, he came. "Huang He and Mu Chu are in the mountain now. Send someone to kill them," Yi Hongyu said. If Lu Bai could think of this, so could the West Hill Divine Palace. The deacon of the judicial department said in a low voice, "It could also be Ning Quebec." Yi Hongyu said, "That guy doesn't have this ability." The deacon in black took the order and left. Several martial arts powerhouses of the Divine Hall led a dozen papal cavalrymen and galloped toward the canyon. The verdant canyon was a killing array built by the Tang Empire with countless manpower. Even if the divine talisman masters could activate the array, their psyche power would be exhausted. This was their weakest moment. Deep in the mountains, Professor Huang He and Professor Mu Chu, who had lived in seclusion for many years, were walking weakly toward the mountain peak with the help of several technical officials of the Ministry of Works. It was difficult to walk in the Green Mountain, so they could only temporarily hide in the fortifications set by the Tang Empire under a mountain peak. The martial arts powerhouses of the West Hill Divine Palace chased after them over the mountain, while the dozen papal cavalrymen galloped to the exit of the canyon, ready to clear the blocked entrance so that the divine talisman masters could open the way later. The divine talisman masters were the rarest resources in the world. Even big countries like the South Jin Kingdom and the Yueluan Kingdom did not have a divine talisman master. In fact, most of the divine talisman masters were in the Academy and Taoism. The Academy had divine talisman masters, and so did the West Hill Divine Palace. The great divine priest of Revelation's peaceful voice came from the sacred sedan, "Senior brothers, thank you very much." An old voice rang out from a luxurious carriage. The Academy and the Divine Hall have always been equal in talisman Taoism. But after the death of senior brother Yen Sei, we are not as good as them. It is easy to destroy, but difficult to build. It will take some time to open a passage. The great divine priest of Revelation said, "We only need a small path to pass." The divine talisman master said, "Why not let the army take a detour?" The great divine priest of Revelation said, "We don't have time." There was silence. The divine talisman master said, "Then the four of us will die here." After a moment of silence, the great divine priest of Revelation said, "Hao Tian will definitely praise you for your virtues. I will reunite with you in the divine kingdom in a few days." While the West Hill Divine Palace was thinking about how to reopen the verdant canyon, the dozen papal cavalrymen responsible for the early cleaning work had arrived at the entrance of the canyon and rode into the dust. A moment later, a whistling sound was heard. A papal cavalryman was shaken out of the dust and fell from a high place like a piece of earth. He fell heavily to the ground and died with broken bones. Then, the whistling sound was heard. More than a dozen papal cavalrymen who entered the exit of the verdant canyon were all shaken out and fell to the hard ground, making muffled sounds. They all fell to their deaths. Then, several martial arts masters who had chased the divine talisman master of the academy over the mountain also turned into corpses and were shaken out. The ground outside the verdant canyon was covered with blood and corpses. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was shocked by this strange scene. Everyone looked at the entrance of the canyon. The exit of the verdant canyon was still full of dust and was extremely dark. It was like the thickest fog in winter or the wettest clouds in summer. It poured out of the canyon like night and filled the field. Suddenly, a melodious sound of a zither sounded in the dust. A moment later, a low sound of a flute joined in. Someone sang along with the sound of the zither and flute. The bright moon rises above the mountains, between the boundless sea of clouds. The wind blows tens of thousands of miles, blowing across the Nanyang Pass. Heaven blocks the way of the human world, people peep at the bend of the Sisui River. From the battlefield, no one returns. The song was not euphemistic, but flat and straight, repeating these sentences. The bright moon rises above the mountains. The wind blows tens of thousands of miles. The heaven blocks the way of the human world, from the battlefield, no one returns. From the battlefield, no one returns. The song echoed in the field. The simple words were sung with the magnificence of the bright moon shining on the battlefield. The song was melodious and gentle, but it was played with a heroic murderous aura. A tall crown appeared amidst the night dust and sand. The night lost its color. A man with a high hat and a broad belt slowly walked out of the sandstorm. His hands were naturally behind his back, and his wide sleeves hung down like clouds. He looked serious and upright, and his bearing was impeccable. Every step he took was carefully taken, so the distance of each step was exactly the same. A beautiful woman in a pomegranate red dress followed the man out. She held an embroidery frame in her hand and carried a bag on her shoulder. She looked curiously at the mighty army opposite. It was the seventh sister of the academy, Muyu. Baigong Weiyang walked out with a zither in his arms, his right fingers stroking the strings from time to time. Shiman Buhua walked out with a flute in his hand, frowning deeply. The fourth brother followed behind with a sand table in his hand, frowning from time to time. He did not like the music to affect his calculation. Walking at the back was the sixth senior brother, who carried a load on his shoulder. At one end of the pole was a burning iron stove, and at the other end was a heavy cabinet. Judging from the bending of the pole, there must be a lot of things in the cabinet. The man who walked out of the mountains like the bright moon, illuminating the dark field. Of course, it was the second brother of the academy. This chapter is about 2,800 words, so I can only stop here. The disciples of the academy walk out of the verdant canyon. I have been waiting for this scene for half a year. I thought I could stimulate myself, but I really can't. I have to lie down for a while and write after I get up. It's the last 3 hours. I need the monthly vote. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 743. In Ning Kei's previous deduction, even if the verdant canyon collapsed and the mountains blocked the enemy, a simple road was needed in the war. The strong enemy who had the courage and strength to attack the Tang Empire would definitely have enough array tactical masters, talisman masters, and even divine talisman masters. They could definitely forcibly break open a road for the cavalry. Therefore, a peerless powerhouse was needed to guard the exit of the verdant canyon. That powerhouse had to be strong enough to kill Buddhas, demons, and Taoist priests. Moreover, he could not rest, sleep, eat, or drink. He might even have to fight with the enemy powerhouses for 3 days and 3 nights. Ning Kei could not help laughing when he thought of these words. He thought that there was no such a powerful person in the world. Even if there was, how could such a powerful person be stupid enough to put himself in a situation where he would definitely die? Note 1, however, no one could have imagined that the world would always change so unexpectedly. 2 years passed and the third autumn came. The Tang Empire, which had once dominated the world, became a broken boat in the ocean. The verdant canyon became the place that the Tang Empire had to hold on to. Even Ning Ke was willing to be that stupid person. Second brother, Jun Mo, came to be that person. He brought the younger brothers and sisters from the back of the mountain of the academy. He frowned slightly and looked behind him. The sound of the zither and flute stopped abruptly. Where is Wang Qi? Beigong Weiyang and Shiman Buhua looked at each other and said confusedly, he was here earlier. In the sandstorm, a person stumbled out. It was Wang Qi, who ranked 11th in the back of the mountain of the academy. He held a few blades of grass in his hand, a few fruits in his arms, and an unknown wildflower in his mouth. Where have you been? Seventh sister took the things in his arms and reprimanded him. You knew that the most important thing was to show up. Note 2, Wang Qi was sweating and said, many of the herbs were buried, and some can only be found here. What if they are extinct? The sandstorm gradually subsided. The autumn sun was blazing again, and there was no cloud in the blue sky. The field outside the verdant canyon was clear. The old voice of the great divine priest of revelation came from afar. Even the headmaster of the academy can't go against heaven, let alone you disciples. The second brother said, Master fights against heaven, so we, the disciples, fight against the human world. It's still unknown whether heaven can be defied. As for the outcome of the battle between us, we'll know soon. The great divine priest of revelation said, the army of the divine hall is here. How can you stop them? Second senior brother did not answer his question directly and only said one sentence. Tang, attack. Yi Hongyu raised her eyebrows slightly and pointed a finger at a blade that pierced through the veil from the outside of the sacred sedan. With a crack, the blade shattered and scattered. One of the papal cavalrymen holding the blade was shocked to death. A deacon of the judicial department silently sneaked into the curtain from the back of the sacred chariot with a poisoned black dagger and stabbed it at her lower back. As long as the tip of the dagger could pierce a little of her skin, it would be enough. Yi Hongyu did not turn around, nor did she attack. A cold star suddenly appeared in the depths of her eyes. Her black hair flowed behind her like a waterfall and hit the face of the deacon in black. The great divine priest of revelation also encountered several waves of assassination. Qing Lishue, who was serving in the sacred chariot, was almost injured. However, these assassins could not succeed in front of the great divine priest and died one after another. Several papal cavalrymen of the divine hall took out their spears at the same time and stabbed into the carriage. However, before the spears could touch the walls of the carriage, they were killed by 5 flying swords. When the second brother said that the Tang should attack, there were at least dozens of assassinations in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. Hundreds of priests, deacons, and military officers of the Yen Kingdom attacked the most important people around them. A general of the Yen Kingdom died tragically under the blades of his trusted bodyguards. These were not the key points. These hundreds of Tangs who had been lurking in foreign countries for many years did not hesitate to reveal their identities and cause chaos in the coalition army just to cover the most important actions. Talisman masters were the weakest cultivators, and divine talisman masters were naturally even weaker. Professor Huang he had to go to the south for several months every year to recuperate, and Professor Mu Chen took medicine all year round. People like Master Yen Sei were really talented and could not be judged by common sense. On the battlefield, the Divine Talisman Master was the most feared figure. Therefore, the Divine Talisman Master became the target that the enemy wanted to assassinate the most. Correspondingly, the protection of the Divine Talisman Master was also the tightest. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army protected the 4 Divine Talisman Masters very closely. They were not far from the sacred chariot of the 2 great divine priests and were heavily protected. However, no matter how cautious they were, no one could have predicted this situation. Who had ever seen the scene of hundreds of assassins suddenly attacking at the same time on the battlefield? Who would have thought that the most loyal bodyguards would suddenly become the most ruthless assassins? This scene was very cold. Very hard. It was even more spectacular than the charge of thousands of cavalry. A carriage was set on fire. A carriage was shot into a scarecrow. A carriage was pierced with countless holes by spears. The blood that flowed out was black. No one could have predicted this situation. Even Yi Hongyu had no time to react. 3 divine talisman masters died in the fatal assassination of the Tangs. Only 1 divine talisman master was saved by the most powerful sword in the world. The assassination, or more accurately, the rebellion in front of the battle, was soon quelled. The field was dyed red with blood. Most of the dead were rebels. Now it could be confirmed that they were all Tangs. Yi Hongyu's face was slightly cold. The great divine priest of revelation had a very complicated expression. He looked at the people of the academy at the exit of the verdant canyon in the distance and said, "This is really an unexpected situation." Second brother looked calm. Even if hundreds of Tangs were killed in the enemy camp, he was still calm. He said, "For thousands of years, your Haotian Taoism has buried countless people in the Tang Empire. Naturally, the Tang Empire has also hidden countless people in the West Hill and other countries." The great divine priest of revelation said, "These people are either from the Imperial Center Administration, the Secret Guards, or the Southern Gate Temple. They don't know each other. How did you contact them in advance and set up this trap?" Second brother said, "There is no need to contact them in advance or organize them. They know that they are Tangs and they have a plan. They know that today's battle is the key to the survival of the Tang Empire. I said the Tangs will do it. They will do it. They are like the verdant canyon, the accumulation of the Tang Empire for thousands of years. They exchanged 20,000 cavalrymen and 3 divine talisman masters. That's enough. Although they are all dead, they are worth it." It was a very calm sentence, but it was as hard, cold, and spectacular as the assassination that had just ended. Now the situation is simple. If you want to pass through the verdant canyon, you have to defeat me. Second brother said calmly and then opened his arms. Seventh sister walked behind him and untied his coat, revealing the close-fitting plain clothes. Beigong Weiyang carried his zither and Shiman Buhua carried his bamboo flute. They walked to second brother's side and helped sixth brother put on the heavy armor carefully. Fourth brother looked at the complicated lines on the sand table and said, "Senior brother may die." Second brother's expression did not change. He said, "Everyone will die." Fourth brother looked at the changing lines on the sand table and said, "He may not die." Seventh sister held second brother's coat and glared at him. She said, "Senior brother is wearing your strongest armor. How could he die?" The fourth brother was a bit sad and said, "Su Shi is wearing the armor made by me and the sixth brother." Seventh sister said anxiously, "At this time, don't you know how to say something auspicious?" Fourth brother said calmly, "This is the secret of heaven." Seventh sister said, "Do you still believe in heaven?" Fourth brother was silent for a moment and then laughed. He reached out to brush off the lines on the sand table. Sixth brother tidied up the details of second brother's armor. Shiman Buhua looked at Beigong Weiyang and said, "Senior brother, I usually play the zither and you play the bamboo flute. Why is it the other way around today?" Beigong Weiyang said, "The zither is a sacred object. I am the senior brother, so of course I should play it." Shiman Buhua sighed and raised the bamboo flute to play. The sound of sobbing gradually rose. Seventh sister was really angry this time. "Who are you playing morning music for?" Shiman Buhua's expression suddenly changed and he quickly changed the tune. Beigong Weiyang sat on the ground and began to play the zither. The elegant music gradually rose. It was neutral and peaceful, with a magnificent mind and the bearing of the sea. In the sound of the zither and bamboo flute, second brother in armor walked forward with a heroic spirit. He held the iron sword in his hand and pointed to the hundreds of thousands of enemies in the south. "Come and fight." Note 1, these 2 paragraphs are copied from the chapter in the 3rd volume. Note 2, the appearance is the most important. This is what I wanted to say. I was so confused that I forgot an important role. Note 3, this is the last chapter for this year and for today. I wish everyone a happy new year in advance. I really can't write anymore. I've said countless truths in my life, and countless lies that seem like the truth. But none of them are as sincere and truthful as this one. Thank you everyone for your love over the years. If you can still sit still and not talk nonsense later, then there will be a separate chapter. It will run through to the end, from the beginning to the end of the year. The last 40 minutes will require a monthly vote. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 744. In May, I said that the monthly votes champion was the greatest honor in the online literature industry. I didn't get it back then, but everyone helped me get it. I said that I was satisfied, because at that time, I didn't even think about the annual votes champion. Everyone knows me, but I really didn't think about it, because I've always been more focused on living a happy life. Let's not talk about the specifics of this matter. In any case, everyone was kind and generous, and I really wanted to fight unbridledly when I was middle-aged, and grab the last tale of my youth. Thus, we joined this battle together, and walked all the way until now, until we obtained the final victory. This time, I can calmly and confidently say that we have won the greatest honor in the online literature industry. We are the Grand Slam, and we are worthy of pride. I will still shout that I'm tired, but I won't go into the specifics, because I'm too tired to type those words. I can only say that I'm really King tired. I've never been so tired in my life. But just like what second senior brother said, it's enough, it's worth it. The first day, there were nearly 10,000 votes. In the end, including Jiang Yi, all the books I wrote on Qidian were pushed to the top, and I was able to get the monthly votes prize. This isn't a problem with the prize money, this is something that has never happened before. This really shocked me, shocked many people. What else can I say? Other than thanking you, I'm amazed at your strength. You are too strong, second only to me. Does anyone want to slap me for saying that? Next, I'm going to write a very cliched thank you speech, please read it carefully. I rarely do this in the past, but this time, I'm doing it. I suddenly understand the feelings of those celebrities who refuse to step down from the stage during award ceremonies. Thank you for subscribing to my original books. I've always insisted that subscribing is the calmest and most certain connection between you and me. Thank you for voting for the monthly votes. Thank you for subscribing to books everywhere in exchange for monthly votes. Thank you for switching accounts with other readers in exchange for more votes. Thank you for not subscribing to the original books yet, but for voting for the precious monthly votes. I rarely thank you because I'm too embarrassed to thank you. Thank you for writing many good book reviews. Thank you for helping me promote everywhere. Thank you for tolerating my laziness. Thank you for all of you. Thank you for my parents. Without them, there wouldn't be me. Without me, there wouldn't be Jiang Yi. Without Jiang Yi, there wouldn't be this monthly votes champion. Thank you for my in-laws. Thank you for my in-laws. Thank you for going online often to see how many votes there were. Thank you for cooking dumplings for me. Thank you for fixing the furniture himself. Thank you for cleaning the cat and dog toilet on the balcony. Why does it feel so official? Thank you to Haitang, thank you to Teacher Jiang, Teacher Bai, and Master Wang. Thank you to Lin Hai, Bing Dregs, Butterfly Blue, Xiao Ding, and Guanu who chatted with me in the group when I couldn't write anymore. Of course, the most important thing is spelling. Thank you to Xiao Hua, Sandbag, Feng Ling, and many others who always spelled until late at night with me. That's right. Even if we fought to the death for the last 3 days, Feng Ling and I still met each other late at night without saying anything. Thank you to all the girls who sent me photos when I couldn't write anything. Thank you to all the girls and men who wrote countless good book reviews in the book review section, Tieba, and Weibo. Thank you to the editors of Team 2. Thank you to the editors of other groups. Why do I feel that all the editors and I are quite good? In that case, I won't list them. Thank you to everyone in Qidian. There must be a lot of things I missed out on. please forgive me. But there are definitely some people who won't forget to thank me. Thank you to Cloud, Thread, Karaoke, Drunk Black, Surfing the Net, Ilan, Anan, Dizzy, Pomelo, and Gossip Fish and his wife who I haven't seen in a long time. Thank you for your hard work. I don't know how to put it. Managing the forum is really troublesome. There are so many trivial things. The management of the various QQ groups is also very troublesome. I've always been a hands-off manager. I don't care about anything, but I've troubled them. The rankings, the popularity of the book review section, these things I don't understand. It's really tough. Although sometimes, I really want to fight with Cloud, I still thank him. If there's a chance, everyone, let's drink. I suddenly thought of something. Regarding Hikai too, I actually knew a long time ago that he read my novel. He didn't see it through at me, but I accidentally saw it one day when I was browsing through his blog. It's just that I'm a slut, so I'm unreasonable. Just like when Prince Ma praised the Vermilion Bird story, I had to pretend to be calm. This is different from when other celebrities read my novel. This is because Prince Ma is the author I love. I really like to read the fragments of Keida's novels. This feels more like Zhang Liangying suddenly appearing in front of me and wanting to sing karaoke with me. Then, she looks at me with deep emotions and says that I sing really well, even though my breathing is a little weak. Oh right, I almost forgot to thank student Mojibai. I'm a person with a relatively bad memory. Although I've written countless notes, I can't understand the characters that are going to appear in the night. I have to thank him for making so many character lists. My mind is really not clear, and I'm talking all over the place. I'll take advantage of my last breath to say a few more things. Some readers said that I made him happy. Actually, you guys are the ones who made me happy. The happiness of being together is a harmonious society. If a CCTV reporter were to ask me, "Are you happy?" how do you think I would answer her? I would do the same as the words I wrote just now, without any glib tone, no coloratura soprano, and little fun simultaneous words. I would tell her very seriously that I'm very happy. Why did I write about her? What problem did this expose in my subconscious? Is there anything that I'm not happy about? On the day of the 14th chapter, there were actually readers urging me to update. I'm really. Later, I suddenly realized that this meant that my writing was not bad, and it attracted readers to read it. So. Also, this month, I was also said that I'm not good at writing, I'm really. A friend named CC leaning on the railing told me that if people don't know about it, aren't you a gentleman? I thought about it and felt that it was right. I'm grateful, but it's hard to do it sincerely. My personal cultivation still needs to be improved. As for the details of the battle in the academy yesterday, a friend on Weibo summarized it very well. From hungry, thirsty, stay up all night dash, Ning Kei's cultivation is not good enough, and his arrow missed. Elder Su Shi's cultivation is not good enough, and his sword missed. Third brother roared, "Bears come and go. Come and fight with Grandpa." Bears was ashamed and angry. He leaped up and punched Yu Lian's knee heavily. He cried, "Since I was born, why did I give birth to a bear?" Bears looked up to the sky and roared, "Haotian, please give me strength." Third brother sneered. "I'll destroy you on behalf of the moon." These days, I'm really happy with these plots, or else I wouldn't have written so much. It's all hard, all good. Where did I write? Forget it, I won't write anymore. Anyway, thank you. As everyone can guess, I'm going to lie down for a few days. 3 days, let me lie down for 3 days. Then I'll continue to write. I said that I'll write for the rest of my life. Because I'm afraid of being forgotten. I think, the last few days of 2012, it's probably hard for me, or you, to forget. This is really good. Goodbye. Happy New Year. I wish you happiness. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 745. Come and fight. Only these two words echoed in the field outside the verdant canyon. It spread to the Green Mountains, the paddy fields, and everyone in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. There was silence in the Coalition Army. Bai Haixin raised his eyebrows and looked at the people at the entrance of the canyon. His eyes grew colder and colder. He said, "Since you want to fight, then let's fight. Get the papal cavalrymen ready to charge." The academy was famous, but this veteran of the Yan kingdom did not feel any pressure. That was because countless wars in human history had proven that even the strongest cultivator would die when facing the charge of the heavy cavalry and the sky full of arrows. Even a grand cultivator who had entered the knowing destiny state would have no power in front of the army. Unless he entered the limitless state, he would be able to ignore the arrows. Everyone knew that the second brother of the academy was very powerful, but no one knew exactly how powerful he was. In the battle at the Lank Temple in the autumn of last year, Yi Su, the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, and Qin Yan, the world wayfarer of Buddhism, attacked him one after another. But everyone knew that he was far from the 5 states, so he was not invincible. It was absurd and ridiculous to think that he could stop the march of the vast army. The horses neighed and hoofbeats sounded. 400 heavy cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace charged toward the verdant canyon. These powerful cavalrymen and their mounts were all wearing strong and heavy armors. Every time the horses' hooves touched the ground, a deep pit would be formed. Countless pieces of soil were trampled and then lifted up, causing smoke and dust. The entire field began to shake. The friction and collision of the armors of the Divine Hall's heavy cavalry became a terrifying tsunami. The armored heavy cavalry was the most powerful way to deal with cultivators on the battlefield. The armors of these papal cavalrymen were all engraved with talisman lines by talisman masters. It was difficult for the cultivators flying swords or other natal items to break the armor, so it was even more difficult to hurt the cavalrymen. Once the heavy cavalry with terrifying power and speed came into contact with the relatively weak bodies of the cultivators, they could smash the cultivators to death in an instant. In the past battles, the armies of various countries had used this method to deal with cultivators and had never failed. At this time, even though it was the disciples of the academy standing at the entrance of the verdant canyon, the Divine Hall Coalition army was still full of confidence. Because no matter how they looked at it, there was no way for the academy's disciples to resolve such a simple and direct charge. No matter how strong Jun Mo was, he was still just a human. In the sacred sedan, Yi Hongyu looked at the verdant canyon in the distance. She was extremely calm, but deep in her eyes, there was a hint of thought and confusion. She thought differently from the others in the coalition army. She knew that the disciples of the academy would not lose so easily. She did not hold out any hope for the charge of the hundreds of riders. However, she could not understand what else Jun Mo could do other than forcefully block the hundreds of cavalrymen with his astonishing sword Dao. Once he really started doing that, she was certain that he would definitely lose today. Even if Jun Mo's strength was beyond imagination, he would definitely be exhausted if he only used an iron sword to cut the hundreds of cavalrymen in the field. Even if he still had strength left, there were more than 200,000 West Hill Divine Palace soldiers in the field. To block the mighty army outside the verdant canyon with his own strength was not something that a human could achieve. Even Mr. Ku did not have such an ability back then, let alone Yi Futian. The heavy cavalry of the West Hill Divine Palace stepped across the field and approached the verdant canyon. At this time, the cavalrymen began to really speed up. Their hooves were like a shower, and the sound was like thunder. Smoke and dust were gradually rising into the air. An extremely tense and murderous aura rose in the field with the sound of hooves. Unexpectedly, the disciples of the academy standing at the entrance of the verdant canyon did not even look at the hundreds of horrible heavy cavalry of the Divine Hall. It was as if they did not see them at all. The 6th brother was digging the ground to build a furnace, and the fourth brother was nailing iron nails on the ground. No one knew if he was going to settle the tents or do something else. Beigong Weiyang and Shiman Buhua sat opposite each other, their fingers pressed on the strings of the zither and flute, as if they were tuning. Only the seventh sister's attention was on the front. She wanted to sew to calm down, so she could not focus on the embroidery frame. Instead, her eyes fell on the back of the second brother in front of her. The sunlight fell on the second brother and was reflected by the surface of his armor. It was elegant and magnificent. 400 cavalrymen did not sound like a lot. In fact, if they appeared in front of the real world, it would be a black mass, which would bring a great sense of oppression and impact to the eyes. Especially the heavy cavalry. When the cavalry charged, the width of the area where the two armies met was not decided by the charging party. At this time, the disciples of the academy were at the entrance of the verdant canyon. So even if thousands of cavalrymen charged at the same time, the charging area could only accommodate a dozen heavy cavalry at most. The heavy cavalry of the Divine Hall was very good at tactics. As they officially began to charge, the formation of the 400 cavalrymen changed naturally without any command. Gradually, they became a sharp charging formation. When they were about 2,000 feet away from the exit of the verdant canyon, the formation of the heavy cavalry of the Divine Hall changed unexpectedly again. The 200 cavalrymen in front separated from the two behind, and then the 200 cavalrymen in front completed a perfect change of direction at high speed. They took a detour to the east for some distance, then turned back and continued to charge toward the verdant canyon. The 200 cavalrymen in the back kept charging straight and came to the front. This charging tactic was the most effective way to maintain the pressure of the heavy cavalry. It could also avoid the impact and interference of the relatively narrow battlefield. The charging formation of the 400 heavy cavalrymen of the Divine Hall suddenly changed, but their momentum did not weaken at all. Instead, it became stronger. The horses' hooves flew, and the sound was like thunder. Smoke and dust rose. At this time, the disciples of the academy at the entrance of the verdant canyon had already seen the magnificent details of the cavalry's armor. Seeing hundreds of cavalrymen charging toward them, the second brother's expression did not change, and his hand holding the iron sword was still steady. The seventh sister pinched the embroidery needle. Her face was a little pale and she began to feel nervous. Clang! Beigong Weiyang slightly raised his eyebrows. His wrist was as light as a cloud sleeve, and his fingers left the strings. He did not look at the battlefield. He did not look at the dense cavalry that would soon flood the entrance of the verdant canyon. He also did not look at the second handsome brother. He focused and focused on the zither. When his fingers left the strings, the zither began to vibrate, and then there was a clang. He raised his left hand that had been quietly resting on his knee and fell down carefully and calmly. The edge of his index finger and thumb touched the still vibrating strings, and then he began to casually twirl them. Since he began to learn the zither, he had repeated this action all the time. No one knew how many times he had done it, so it was very casual and elegant, like a master. The seemingly simple action actually contained infinite details. Except for Shiman Buhua, who was wiping the flute, no one could clearly see the meaning of his twirl. The trembling of the strings suddenly intensified, but the amplitude of the vibrations was forcefully controlled by the fingers on the strings to a very small range. As a result, the sound coming from the strings became more and more sonorous, and sharper and sharper. Clang! The pebbles on the ground kept trembling, making a rustling sound. The sound of the zither spread more than 100 feet away and then disappeared. The pebbles on the ground were calm and silent. Thus, a circle with a radius of more than 100 feet was formed, with the zither as the center. Shiman Buhua's hearing was the most sensitive. His face instantly turned pale, and he painfully covered his ears. Wang Qi frowned with some discomfort. Seventh sister's fingers that held the embroidery needle trembled. Second brother's back was still motionless. The sound of the zither was loud and sharp in this area, which made people feel pain. When the sound of the zither left this area, it became silent, which made people feel confused. Silence did not mean that there was no sound. Not hearing it did not mean that there was no sound. There were many sounds in nature that human beings could not hear, but other creatures could. Such as horses. The heavy cavalry charging at the front suddenly disappeared from people's sight. A dull crash sounded, and smoke and dust rose. For some reason, the heavy cavalry's mount suddenly lost its strength in its front limbs. In a high-speed charge, this situation was equivalent to suicide. Then, another heavy cavalry disappeared. As the horse under him fell heavily to the ground, more heavy cavalrymen of the Divine Hall fell to the ground one after another. With these scenes, the aggressive charge turned into an extremely tragic crash. Dozens of horses at the front neighed miserably and fell to the ground, with broken limbs and broken bones, and blood splashing everywhere. In just a moment, the field more than 100 feet away from the verdant canyon was piled up into a small mountain of flesh and armor by the charging heavy cavalry. One could imagine how terrible the situation was. In the divine chariot in the south, the great divine priest of revelation opened his eyes and looked at the verdant canyon. In his wise and experienced eyes, there was vigilance and emotion. The loudest sound is silent. Why do the strings move? The great divine priest of revelation's lips moved slightly. This sentence was only mouthed, but no sound came out. The loudest sound is silent. Beigong Weiyang's zither was loud, so the horses were afraid. The teaching sound of the great divine priest of revelation was also loud, so it spread to the verdant canyon. When the soundless zither met the soundless teaching sound, it became really silent. The heavy cavalry who were still charging suddenly felt relieved. They fiercely squeezed their horses' bellies and urged their mounts to bypass their companions who had suffered heavy casualties in front of them, and made a final charge toward the canyon. Beigong Weiyang's fingers that were playing the zither were shaken off, and there was a very thin line of blood on the edge of his fingernails. He looked at his junior brother Shiman Buhua. Shiman Buhua raised his flute and blew gently. The wind passed through the flute, but it was also silent. Beigong Weiyang smiled happily, and his fingers fell on the strings again. Outside the verdant canyon. The sound of hooves. The sound of horses neighing. The sound of killing. The sound of falling to the ground. The sound of screams. The senior brother and junior brother looked intoxicated. They played the flute and the zither, but there was no sound. At this time, there was silence, but there was sound. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 746. Although the verdant canyon had collapsed, the entrance was still relatively flat and spacious. However, it was blocked by countless huge rocks not far in, like a terrifying iron wall. Hundreds of heavy cavalrymen rushed from the south. Their purpose was to push the academy disciples to death with the help of the terrible impact. In such a terrain, even if they succeeded, there was no chance of survival. Therefore, these heavy cavalrymen were ready to die. Although they saw their companions falling to the ground and their faces turned pale, they still gritted their teeth and continued to rush forward. After a long time, the field hundreds of feet away from the exit of the verdant canyon was covered with black bodies. The warhorses neighed miserably and the seriously injured heavy cavalrymen struggled to stand up, but they could not. The scene was extremely bloody and miserable. Only the last dozens of cavalrymen at the back were sure that the charge had failed and retreated with great difficulty. In the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army in the south, the great divine priest of revelation stopped chanting and looked in the direction of the verdant canyon. His old face showed a very complicated expression. He sighed and said, "Rhythm is the end. Even if you too cultivate to the knowing destiny state, you can't see the end of the way of heaven. Why do you have to do this?" The great divine priest of revelation's voice sounded at the exit of the verdant canyon. Beigong Weiyang understood the meaning of this sentence. He looked to the south and said, "All the methods in the world are Tao. Cultivating rhythm is cultivating the way of heaven. However, rhythm is not used for fighting, but for understanding. What's the difference between a knowing destiny state cultivator and an ordinary person? I thought the great divine priest was an elegant person, but you don't even understand this. When he was talking to the great divine priest of revelation, no one paid attention to him at the entrance of the verdant canyon. They were all quietly doing their own things. Seventh sister was dividing the lines, and fourth brother was holding a sand table and instructing sixth brother to insert something. Of course, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army would not give them any chance to rest. When the heavy cavalry's charge was about to be thwarted, countless cavalry and archers had already rushed out of the formation. They galloped to the verdant canyon for a distance and then pulled their bows and arrows. Hearing a military order, countless hardwood bowstrings buzzed and countless arrows left the bowstrings. With a shrill sound, they went straight to the blue sky, as if they were going to shoot through the sky. Countless arrows reached the highest point in the air and then began to fall. The shrill sound of breaking through the air became sharper and more terrifying. Finally, it turned into a dark storm of arrows falling toward the mouth of the verdant canyon. Second brother stood in front of the formation and looked at the dense arrows falling like rain. He had no intention of dodging at all. He just reached out and put down his mask. With a crisp sound of metal clashing, the armor covered his whole body. Dang, 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 dang. A series of crisp and muffled sounds of arrows colliding rang out continuously, almost simultaneously. There were at least 20 arrows that accurately hit his body. The sharp arrowhead, with great speed and power, spun and fiercely collided with the armor on his body. However, at this moment, about 3 hairs below the surface of the armor, there was a faint glow. Dense and complicated talisman lines were activated, summoning the chi of heaven and earth in the verdant canyon and turning it into an armor similar to the chi of heaven and earth on the surface of the metal armor. An ear-piercing sound of friction rang out. The arrowheads of those arrows were extremely sharp, but they could not even pierce through the outermost protective layer of the chi of heaven and earth. The huge impact was finally transmitted to the arrow shafts. Some of the 20 or so arrows were broken in the middle, and some were bent out of shape. They fell weakly on the ground in front of second senior brother, like useless straws. Second senior brother did not move at all, like a mountain. The long-range arrow attack basically covered a large area. Therefore, compared with second brother, who was hit by more than 20 arrows, the academy disciples had to bear more dense and terrible arrows. When the countless arrows shot by the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army had just left the bowstrings and turned into dense black dots in the sky, the academy disciples took action in advance. Under the command of fourth brother, sixth brother inserted a dozen metal rods into the ground within a radius of more than 100 feet. The bottom of each metal rod was tied with a red line. These red lines were randomly placed on the ground, with many knots in the middle. They were tied to everyone's ankles, leaving only 2 threads. One was tied to seventh sister's embroidery needle. The other was tied to second brother's waist. As the arrow rain approached, sixth brother looked up at the sky. His face, which had been blackened by the fire all year round, remained calm. His right hand, which was particularly thick because of waving the iron hammer, shook forward and a scroll was opened in his hand. It spread from east to west like a wave and instantly spread out on the dozen metal rods. Judging from the color of the scroll, it seemed to be metal, but it was very thin and tough. It could be rolled up like a quilt. The spring under the edge of the metal piece automatically connected with the metal rods and then fastened. With a cracking sound, a piece of metal cloth appeared outside the verdant canyon. It covered more than 100 feet and covered all the academy disciples except second brother, sprinkling a blue light. At this moment, the arrow rain also arrived. Boom, 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 boom. Dense and muffled sounds rang above the heads of the academy's disciples, as if hundreds of the best drummers were beating the taut drum in the most presumptuous manner. None of the arrows could penetrate the metal cloth. Even if that piece of metal looked so thin and soft, like paper, it would not be able to withstand it. Beigong Weiyang was playing the zither, Shiman Buhua was sticking the film, Wang Qi was decocting medicine, fourth brother was designing something new, and sixth brother was lighting the stove. The arrows fell like rain. It was quiet as usual. It seemed that they were still in the back of the mountain of the academy, not listening to the rain and concentrating on their own things. Only seventh sister frowned slightly and looked at the embroidery cloth without saying a word. Because the red thread was on her embroidery needle. The surface of the metal cloth was also covered with a very thin but extremely condensed layer of qi of heaven and earth. It was like the best defensive armor, bouncing off all the falling arrows. It was an array. The red thread tied to the metal rods and everyone's ankles gradually floated up and then became slightly tighter. The academy disciples sat in the midst of the majestic arrow rain. Second brother stood in the rain like a silent mountain. Looking at this scene, many people in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army were in despair. But many people had already guessed this result. If the academy did not have a way to deal with the arrow rain and the heavy cavalry, how could they face the mighty Divine Hall army? Just when everyone's attention was attracted by the arrow rain, 6 swordsmen in simple clothes left the quiet carriage in the coalition army camp and walked toward the verdant canyon. The swordsman in the middle could only walk with someone holding his hand, but it was not because he could not walk. His eyes were covered with a strip of cloth, so it was probably because he could not see clearly. After the arrow rain, the 6 swordsmen walked past the cavalry camp and stopped not far from the verdant canyon. The blind swordsman was pointed in the direction by his companions and bowed to second brother with hands folded in front. Second brother lifted his mask and revealed an indifferent face. He looked at the blind swordsman and said, "Your eyes were destroyed by the academy. I let you go back to the sword garret because of your brother. You don't have to thank me." The blind swordsman was Lu Yiqing, the master of the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom, who Ning Ke had blinded his eyes after he broke through the back cliff. He was also the younger brother of the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. After being sent back to the sword garret, this once proud and arrogant master of sword Taoism thought about the fiasco at the side door of the academy. His temperament had greatly improved after he was sent back to the sword garret. Not only did he not stop cultivating, but he successfully entered the knowing destiny state last spring. Lu Yiqing could not see, but he could hear second brother's voice to confirm his position. He said calmly, "I thank you not for the past, but for giving us a chance to fight." His words were very sincere, because it was the truth. The ability and range of a cultivator to control a flying sword was proportional to his cultivation state. Although the 6 second-generation disciples of the sword garret were powerful, they could not be compared with second brother. Earlier, when they were walking toward the verdant canyon, second brother could have killed them with his iron sword, and they would not have had a chance to fight back. "I'm just curious why Mr. Lu Bai let you fight." Second brother looked at the quiet carriage in the coalition army camp and said slowly. Lu Yiqing said, "My brother felt honored that the headmaster borrowed the sword of the sword garret in spring, but he also felt a little regretful. From then on, no one could use the sword of the human world. After thinking hard, he asked the 6 of us to practice a sword array in memory of our predecessors. This time, I would like to ask Mr. Second to evaluate it." Hearing this, second brother's eyes lit up and he said, "Okay." Lu Yiqing said, "Thank you." Then, Lu Yiqing and the other 5 disciples unsheathed their swords. The disciples of the sword garret learned from Lu Bai's great river swordsmanship and paid particular attention to the space in front of them. Therefore, they were different from any other swordsmanship sects in the world. They were not famous for their flying swords, but for walking with swords. In the past, Jun Mo admired Lu Bai's swordsmanship the most. Therefore, he was not surprised to see these disciples unsheathing their swords. Unexpectedly, after Lu Yiqing and the other 5 disciples unsheathed their swords, they did not move forward. They pinched the sword formula with their hands. In the clear sound, 6 cold swords broke through the air in front of the verdant canyon and turned into countless shadows. In an instant, they condensed into a sword and pierced out. In spring, the headmaster reached out to the south and borrowed the sword in the ancient pond of the sword Garrett from thousands of miles away. He killed the divine general of the Hautian divine kingdom and cut off the head of the giant golden dragon. After that, that sword was no longer an ordinary sword, but a real sword of the human world. Even Liu Bai could not use that sword anymore. Liu Bai thought hard for countless days and finally confirmed that since there was no headmaster, no one could use the sword of the human world alone. Therefore, he chose another path. He gathered 6 of the most outstanding disciples of the sword Garrett and practiced a sword array. They gathered the strength of several people to perform one sword. Liu Bai was very clear that even if all the disciples of the sword Garrett gathered their strength, they would not be able to perform the sword of the headmaster. But he did not want much. As long as he could have the shape of the sword and the sword essence, it would be enough. 1,000th of the sword of the human world was enough to sweep the world. This was the sword outside the verdant canyon. Looking at the sword that broke through the air, the second brother praised, "Good sword." He stabbed the iron sword in his hand into the field in front of him. Facing such a powerful sword, he did not seem to be ready to use his sword. What was he going to do? Bai Haixin is from the South Jin Kingdom, not the Yan Kingdom. I wrote wrongly. My brain is not working well and my illness is a little troublesome. Yesterday I went to the hospital and my friends found out that I was really sick. They did not say sorry to me and sigh. I will recover as soon as possible. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 747. A hand stretched out in the air. It was a steady hand with a strong thumb and 4 slender fingers, suitable for holding a sword. But this hand was not holding anything at this time. It was just pointing at the huge sword that was breaking through the air. Several wisps of extremely faint aura were released from the fingers. The huge sword seemed to feel something and began to tremble. Then, it swung up and down, left and right, more and more violently, like a person who was tied up and struggling. Second brother looked at the huge sword in silence. There was no extra emotion on his face, only calmness. The sword became more and more restless. The people who were watching the battle in the wilderness could even vaguely feel fear from the sword struggle. The huge sword trembled more and more violently. Gradually, cracks appeared on the body of the sword, and then it split again. With a few swishing sounds, several sword shadows appeared in the air hundreds of feet above the ground. Then, they turned into several sword rainbows and flew towards second senior brother's body one after another in a very circular trajectory. Although the swords were fast and sharp, they did not have any killing intent. When a flying sword flew in front of second senior brother, it suddenly slowed down and finally stopped in front of him. The body of the sword trembled slightly, like a very obedient child waiting to be punished after doing something wrong. Second brother reached out and grabbed the hilt of the sword. He plucked the flying sword and stuck it into the ground in front of him. The word plucked was very accurate, because he was not snatching, or stealing. He just casually reached out and grabbed the flying sword from the air. His movements were very ordinary and natural, as if he was plucking a fruit from a tree branch. The second flying sword arrived at this time. Second brother reached out and plucked it, sticking it into the ground in front of him. The third flying sword. The fourth flying sword. The fifth flying sword. Second brother stood outside the verdant canyon. A wide iron sword was stabbed into the ground next to him. Beside the iron sword, there were 5 swords stuck in the ground. It looked like a fence made of swords. The 5 swords used to be a huge sword from the sword Garrett of South Jin Kingdom. It was made by Liu Bai, the sage of sword. It had learned the style of the headmaster and the bearing of the predecessors, so its power was naturally extraordinary. However, after encountering second senior brother, the sword could only crack open again and obediently let itself be plucked off. Then it was made into a fence. The disciples of the sword Garrett looked at the scene in the verdant canyon in the distance. They were so shocked that they were at a loss. Later, they found that their natal swords were out of control and their sense of perception was severely damaged. They spat out blood. There was dead silence in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army. Especially those great figures with profound cultivation, their expressions were even more unsightly. Only they knew what second senior brother's seemingly simple method of plucking the sword to form a fence actually meant. It was already unimaginable for the sword pavilion's sword to be forcefully separated. What shocked them even more was the scene of second senior brother retrieving the 5 swords. Cultivation was about control. A cultivator's control over his natal item started from his innate nature. Moreover, every cultivator would spend the most time and energy in his cultivation to strengthen the connection between himself and his natal item. Therefore, this kind of control was the strongest kind of relationship in the cultivation world. Even if there was a world of difference between their states, it was difficult for a high-level cultivator to sever the connection between a low-level cultivator and his natal item. Even if some truly powerful grand cultivators could use powerful means to do so, no one had ever heard of anyone who could so easily make someone else's natal item his own. Second senior brother had waved his hand and split the huge sword. The 5 flying swords obeyed his command and fell. It was obvious that he had not destroyed them, but subdued them. How did he do it? In the sacred sedan, Yi Hongyu's expression became a little strange. Her beautiful cheeks flushed unnaturally and the stars in her eyes grew brighter. She looked excited and alert. There is actually someone in the world who can see through the slightest changes in the chi of heaven and earth. It turns out that before Ning Ke and I, there was already someone with the gift of fighting heart in this world. Facing the powerful sword of the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom, second senior brother did not choose to use his sword. He chose to attack. He used one hand. One hand was enough. However, the battle at the Verdant Canyon did not end there. The huge sword of the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom had combined 6 swords into one. At this moment, 5 swords were stuck in the ground in front of second senior brother, and 1 sword was missing. Lu Yiqing sat cross-legged in the wilderness and whistled. Blood seeped out of the white cloth that covered his eyes. Psyche power shot out. An ethereal sword shadow appeared in the blue sky and disappeared instantly. When it reappeared, it had already passed through second senior brother's position and reached the metal canopy in front of the Verdant Canyon. The Sword Firmament Pavilion didn't think that they could defeat their second senior brother with this sword. From the beginning, their goal was to use this sword to hide the last sword shadow. After Lu Yiqing's eyes were blinded by Ning Ke, his heart of sword became extremely pure and steady. Being unable to see made him extremely sensitive to the chi of heaven and earth. Now, his sword was as strange as a ghost. That strange sword shadow was aimed at Beigong Weiyang. The charge of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had already proved that Beigong Weiyang was the key figure in this battle. Lu Yiqing's target had always been him and the zither on his knees. Sensing that success was right in front of him and that his natal sword was about to touch the taut strings, Lu Yiqing could not suppress his excitement and his whistling became sharper. His eyes were injured by Ning Ke at the side gate of the academy, but he did not hate the academy because it was a fair fight. He just wanted to defeat the academy, even if only once, no matter who it was. The next moment, Lu Yiqing's whistling suddenly stopped. His face revealed a very complicated expression. Because he felt that his life-bond sword had touched many strands like strings. But they were not zither strings. Because there were too many of them. So many of them were like a net. A net waiting for him to throw himself into. Beigong Weiyang's attention was always on the zither strings. He did not care about what was happening on the battlefield because second brother was always standing there like a mountain, so he thought he was definitely safe. Therefore, when Lu Yiqing's indescribable sword shadow suddenly disappeared from the blue sky, flashed inside the metal canopy, appeared in front of him, and was about to stab into his chest, he was startled. As the great divine priest of revelation had said, he and Shimen Buhua cultivated with rhythm. Even if they reached the knowing destiny state, they still could not fight. So he had no way to deal with this flying sword. At this moment, Beigong Weiyang thought he was really going to die. But then he remembered that there were many people around him, so he knew he would not die. He was indeed not dead. Seventh sister Mu Yu raised her wrist slightly, and the embroidery needle between her fingers went through the embroidery cloth. The red thread on the embroidery needle had been hanging on the ground, tied to everyone's ankles and the metal rods. As she moved, the messy red thread also moved. As the red thread moved, there were countless fine and tough auras coming out of the canopy. The strange sword's shadow was bound by countless auras, and suddenly became like an insect in a spider's web or a beast in a swamp. No matter how hard it struggled, it could not move an inch. Lu Yiqing, who was sitting cross-legged in the field in the distance, knew the situation he was facing better than anyone else because of the connection of his natal sword. He tried to call back his natal sword without hesitation. The strange sword's shadow, because of the sudden stillness, finally showed its body. It was a very dim and thin flying sword, ready to retreat quietly. Fourth brother was drawing something on the sand table with his head down. Feeling the flying sword's intention to leave, he raised his head and flicked his fingers. A yellowish fu paper flew up, fell on the sword, and wrapped it up. Lu Yiqing's strange sword was extremely sharp. At this time, under the control of his psyche power, it was forced to retreat. With a sizzling sound, a crack appeared on the yellowish fu paper, and the talisman intent was not fully released. But the two were locked in a stalemate, and there was always a period of temporary stillness. At this time, an iron clamp reached out from the air. The iron clamp opened and closed, clamping the flying sword, and placed it on the burning stove. The blue-hot flame instantly burned the fu paper wrapped around the sword. A heavy iron hammer was raised high and then smashed down. There was a crisp bang. The dim and thin but extremely tough strange sword was smashed and jumped up, as if it could not bear the pain. Sixth senior brother was forging iron. This was sixth brother forging swords. This was an action he had repeated all his life. Even the most hard-working swordsman in the world could not be more skillful and natural than him. So the strange sword had no chance to refuse. It was smashed into scrap metal. There was a puff. Lu Yiqing's face was pale, and his chest was covered with blood. His body swayed and he almost fell. At this time, he finally understood why his strange sword could hide from second brother's eyes. It was because these academy disciples did not care about his strange sword at all. This strange sword of yours is not bad. You are also good to be able to enter the knowing destiny state in such a short time. But what is really good is the big sword from before. Second brother said, Lu Bai's idea is good. The teacher's sword of the world can sweep the world with just a wisp of sword style. Unfortunately, your cultivation states are a little weak. If there were 6 swordsmen in the knowing destiny state, it would be much more difficult for me to deal with them. Lu Yiqing stood up with the help of his fellow disciples. He wiped the blood off his lips and listened to the direction of the voice. He bowed sincerely and said, "Thank you for your advice, Mr. Second. Go back and tell Lu Bai that since we have to fight in the end, we might as well fight now. Why should we let you guys die? Now that I am in my peak state, I can fight to my heart's content." Second brother looked to somewhere in the south and said expressionlessly. In the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army camp in the south. The quiet horse carriage was still very quiet. After a while, a somewhat lonely voice came from the carriage. The more you fight, the stronger you become. Since you want to fight to your heart's content, I naturally have to wait for you to fight. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a waste of the battle between us? Better, I will write 2 chapters tomorrow. In addition, I recommend a new book by Xiao Sarang. The book is called The Strongest Prison System, and the book number is 2533323. Please support it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 748. Countless arrows lay on the metal tarp, forming a thick layer that looked like dark dry straws. It covered the metal tarp and made it look like a thatched hut. The cool autumn wind blew on the edge of the thin metal tarp, making a rustling sound, as if it was flipping the paper in a mansion's boudoir, and no one knew when the paper would be torn. The disciples of the academy did not worry that the tarp above their heads would be torn by the autumn wind. They believed in the sixth brother's talent in material science, so they did their own things quietly. Lu Yiqing's sword had become a thin, black, and edgeless iron rod on the stove. The sixth brother was still holding the iron hammer and hammering on it. No one knew what he wanted to refine the sword into. Beigong Weiyang tuned the strings and carefully wrapped a layer of soft cotton cloth around his fingers. The film that Shiman Buhua had applied had also dried and formed a protective layer on his fingertips. He pressed on the holes one by one to test the feel of the flute. The fourth brother frowned and stared at the automatically changing lines on the sand table. His calm eyes flashed with a wisp of divine sense. No one knew what he was calculating at the moment, whether it was the life and death of everyone or the end of the battle. Only the seventh sister's mood was a little strange. She was the only woman at the exit of the verdant canyon. She held the embroidery frame, held the embroidery needle, and looked down at the mandarin ducks on the embroidery cloth. In fact, she had been looking at the distant field out of the corner of her eyes. The second brother stood there like a green mountain. There was a worried look on her face. She was not worried about the current situation or the safety of her fellow disciples under the canopy, but about second brother's safety. Earlier, when Lu Yiqing's sly sword was trapped by the formation, she was the only one who noticed that a faint white turbulence had appeared on the surface of second brother's armor. That was the result of the contact between the sword intent and the talisman intent. The tarp at the exit of the verdant canyon was an array. It was designed by the fourth brother and her, and then arranged by her and the sixth brother. It showed the highest level of the three of them in the academy. This seemingly inconspicuous tarp array could block the autumn rain, the scorching sun, and could not be broken by the autumn wind. Most importantly, this canopy formation could protect everyone under the canopy formation, and it could transfer all the attacks that the canopy formation couldn't withstand to the disciples under the canopy, to second senior brother. When the verdant canyon collapsed, the Tang Empire's thousand-year assassins suddenly attacked and killed 3 divine talisman masters of the West Hill Divine Palace. Second brother once said that if the Divine Hall Coalition army wanted to cross the verdant canyon, they had to defeat him. It was not that he did not respect his fellow disciples of the academy, but it was the truth. Second brother would take all the attacks from the West Hill Divine Palace on behalf of his younger brothers and sisters. Therefore, before he fell, the disciples of the academy would definitely be able to defend the verdant canyon. However, this also meant that he had to bear more. The sword garret of South Jin Kingdom had attacked. Although no one had expected that the second-generation disciples of the sword garret would be able to defeat the people from the college, it was still shocking that they had ended up in such a pathetic state. There was dead silence in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army. They are only in the see-through state. We all know that the disciples of the academy are only in the see-through state. How could they set up such an amazing array? A highly accomplished array tactical master from the West Hill Divine Palace looked at the simple canopy formation at the exit of the verdant canyon and could not help but reveal an expression of admiration. The voice of the array tactical master came into the divine chariot. Yi Hongyu frowned slightly, and the color of the gown of judgment became darker and darker. She had lived in Chang'an for a period of time and had many dealings with the academy. However, it was not until this moment that she realized that the academy's potential was actually higher than everyone had imagined. In the decades between Kuhaoren and Ningke, the 2 generations of the academy who had entered the human realm, the academy had always been very low-key. Even in the cultivation world, not many people knew who was in the back of the mountain of the academy. The West Hill Divine Palace and the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom naturally knew more, but their attention had always been on Mr. First, Mr. Second, and Shin Pippi and Ning Ke who had entered the academy last. That was because the back of the mountain of the academy had confirmed that only these 4 people had entered the knowing destiny state. The others had been in the see-through state for many years. Today's encounter at the entrance of the verdant canyon had confirmed this speculation. The disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy were indeed in the see-through state. If they were placed in the cultivation world, they would be considered masters. However, in the context of the current battle in the human world, where powerhouses in the knowing destiny state emerged one after another, these disciples in the see-through state seemed very insignificant. Even if these disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy were the most talented in certain fields in the past, who would remember their names after so many years? Furthermore, how could geniuses help cultivation? Therefore, no one cared about them. The eyes of the West Hill Divine Palace had been fixed on second brother, who had walked into the wilderness like the bright moon rising from the mountains. It was not until the heavy cavalry began to charge and Lu Yiqing's swords were smashed into scrap iron that they realized they were wrong. They were all second-generation disciples, but the academy was not the sword garret. The academy was not any place. There was no place that could be compared to the academy. The see-through state of the academy was not an ordinary see-through state. The disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy could fend off thousands of troops with just a zither and a flute. What shocked the bigwigs in the coalition even more was that each disciple of the back of the mountain of the academy had his or her own field of expertise. These people combined could produce incredible results. This was education without discrimination. Therefore, the academy would accept people from the devil's doctrine and geniuses from Haotian Taoism. That was why there were people like Kuharan and Ning Ke in the academy. This was teaching in accordance with their aptitude. Therefore, no matter if they played chess or chewed flowers, they would find their own world after learning in the academy. Could it be that the headmaster of the academy had already thought of the current situation when he accepted disciples many years ago? Yi Hongyu thought silently. Her admiration for the headmaster of the academy grew stronger. We can't be blocked outside the verdant canyon. The great divine priest of revelation looked up at the cloudless blue sky through the top curtain of the sacred sedan. He said, the battle between Haotian and the headmaster of the academy is unknown. Therefore, the outcome of the battle in the human world is particularly important, and Cheng and is the key to this battle in the human world. Qing Lixuan knelt beside him and served him a cup of tea. The great divine priest of revelation took a sip of tea to moisten his dry throat. He said, now that the God-stunning array has been temporarily destroyed by the hierarch, the key to Cheng and is the battle between the Abbey Dean and Mr. First. As long as Mr. First can't hold the Abbey Dean back, the Abbey Dean can open the gate of Cheng and. Qing Lishue's fingers trembled slightly. It was not until now that he knew the overall plan of Haotian Taoism and that Cheng and was in such a dangerous situation. Cheng and will open in 6 days. But even the Abbey Dean can't completely destroy the God-stunning array. No one knows when the city will repair itself. Therefore, the army must hurry over. The great divine priest of revelation looked at the green mountain in the north and the narrow exit of the verdant canyon. He said expressionlessly, continue. As long as you are human, you will get tired eventually. The commander's flag was raised in the camp of the coalition. Countless military orders were passed down from commander-in-chief by Haixin to the various military camps. After a while, dense and even violent hoofbeats sounded again. More than 2,000 heavy cavalrymen marched out of the formation and then divided into dozens of groups. They kept a distance from each other and rushed toward the verdant canyon like countless dark clouds. At the exit of the verdant canyon, there were still 300 seriously injured warhorses lying on the ground. Some cavalrymen were supporting each other as they walked back. All of this proved that charging was useless against the verdant canyon. But the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army had no other choice. If they abandoned their horses and fought on foot or used heavy infantry to crush them, they would only become corpses for Second Brother's iron sword. The only way they could compete with the broad and straight iron sword was the impact. This was the only way to break through the Academy's defense. It was also the best way. As the great divine priest of revelation said, as long as there were people, they would get tired. There were more than 200,000 people in the Westhill Divine Palace Coalition Army. They would not get tired if they took turns to charge. The concentrated sound of hoofbeats rang out, and it did not stop. More than 2,000 cavalrymen maintained the most efficient formation and charged toward the verdant canyon in batches. They did not put in much strength each time, but they made sure that the disciples of the academy had to deal with it with all their strength. Most importantly, under the strict military orders, these cavalrymen had to ensure that their attacks were continuous without a moment's pause in between, so that the disciples of the academy would not have any chance to rest. The black waves formed by the cavalry kept hitting the exit of the verdant canyon. There seemed to be an invisible barrier there, an invisible reef. A dark cloud floated over and hit the verdant canyon. It broke into pieces and scattered. A black wave crashed into the verdant canyon, breaking into water foam and falling down silently. The screams of the warhorses and the sound of bones breaking rang clearly in everyone's ears. It was even louder than the dense hoofbeats. But no matter how miserable the situation in front of them was, the cavalrymen still charged expressionlessly. Their mission today was to die. Their goal was to make the disciples of the academy feel tired with their own deaths. Beigong Weiyang did not feel tired. Or rather, he did not know what it felt like to be tired. All his attention was on the zither in front of him. He lowered his head and focused on the slightest vibration of the zither strings. His loose black hair swayed in front of his eyes. His clothes had long been soaked in sweat, and even his hair had become extremely wet. As he played, beads of sweat fell from his hair. With a soft sound, the bead of sweat fell on the zither strings and was instantly burned into smoke. But he did not notice it at all. He was still playing the zither. His fingers kept plucking, twisting, and pressing on the zither strings, moving as fast as lightning. The cotton cloth wrapped around his fingers had long been torn and blood could be seen faintly. Shiman Buhua did not feel tired. He only felt a little pain. His hand was very painful. The glue that had been stuck to his fingertips had long been torn apart with the countless punching movements. It peeled off and dried into powder, flying around the flute like fog or smoke. There were already mottled blood stains on the smooth and lustrous flute. It was very beautiful when blended with the faint vermilion color of the flute. This pair of senior brother and junior brother, who were good at music, were originally the most carefree, cheerful and joking people in the back mountain of the academy. But once they immersed themselves in the world of music, they had a different kind of elegance. But at this moment, they did not have any elegance to speak of. They were not in the mood to tell jokes. Their faces were pale, their lips were dry, and their hair was messy. They were as haggard as those old musicians who performed on the streets. Their expressions were very solemn, very heavy, and very solemn. This kind of heaviness made them show another kind of admirable aura. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 749. It was the first day of the Battle of Verdant Canyon. The weather was clear. It was time for a funeral, but not for anything else. Compared to the screams and cries that rang out from time to time in the wilderness, the exit of Verdant Canyon was very quiet. The zither strings trembled and the flute sounded, but no sound was heard. At this moment, a whimper suddenly sounded under the silent canopy. It was the sound of the flute. Fourth brother suddenly looked up at Shiman Buhua. He looked at his pale face and the beads of sweat on his forehead. His right hand that was holding the wooden brush trembled and his expression grew solemn. There was a clang. The sound of the zither sounded again. Seventh sister looked up. Her fingers that were holding the embroidery needle began to tremble. She looked at Beigong Weiyang and the blood-stained zither strings in front of him with a worried look on her face. Gradually, the sounds of the zither and the flute sounded again. This meant that Beigong and Shiman were truly tired. They could no longer perform like before, full of energy to play the music from beginning to end. Their control could no longer be precise, and the more this was the case, the more psyche power and spirit they had to expend to deal with the charging warhorses. The people under the canopy all looked up at Beigong and Shimen, who were playing the zither and the flute. Their faces were full of worry. Second brother, who was standing in the wilderness outside the canopy, did not look back. His right hand reached for the hilt of his iron sword. Beigong and Shimen did not know that their fellow disciples were looking at them. Their spirit and attention, and even their souls, were focused on the zither and the flute. They were the first to realize the problem. They did not want to withdraw from this battle. The disciples of the academy under the canopy all knew that the Westhill Divine Palace Coalition army did not care about the heavy casualties and continued to launch suicidal attacks in order to wear them down. More precisely, they wanted to wear down second brother. Because the defense of the Verdant Canyon depended on second brother. Therefore, what the younger brothers and sisters had to do was to try their best to help senior brother hold on for a while longer, so that he could rest for a while and deal with the real attack that was coming soon. Beigong and Shimen were indeed tired. Their bodies were tired, and so were their fingers. The blood that flowed from their fingers stained the zither and the flute. Even the sounds of the zither and the flute began to become hoarse. But their hearts were not tired. At least at this moment, their hearts were firm and strong enough. Beigong Weiyang's fingers suddenly stopped. He raised his head and looked at the endless cavalrymen of the Allied army charging over from the plains. He smiled. Then, with a clear whistle, he flicked his wrist. His bleeding fingers stroked the strings of the zither from back to front, his movements extremely elegant. The clear sound of a zither rang out like spring water. When Shimen Buhua heard the real sound of the zither, a resolute smile appeared on his face. The flute suddenly burst forth with a real and bright sound, like that of a shepherd boy blowing leaves. At this moment, the zither and flute were no longer playing soundless music, but real music. The spring water gurgled, gradually turning into a golden strike. The shepherd boy blew the leaves, which gradually turned into a mournful wail. The sound of the zither and flute carried an indomitable and heroic aura, spreading to the wilderness. It was a golden dagger axe, an iron horse. The violent sound of the zither and flute caused the charging warhorses to go berserk. For the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall and South Jin Kingdom who were riding on the warhorses, the music was like countless sharp knives, directly stabbing into their brains. Several cavalrymen at the forefront cried out in pain and fell off their horses. Their feet were dragged by the stirrups, and their bodies were dragged forward in the wilderness. After a while, they were covered in blood, and many bones were broken. Their hands were clearly empty, but they didn't untie their feet. They just tightly covered their ears. To them, the pain brought by the sound of the zither and flute was countless times greater than the pain of broken bones and torn flesh being dragged forward by the warhorses. When more cavalrymen heard the sound of the zither and flute, their faces suddenly turned pale. They instinctively threw away all the weapons that should not have left their hands, and then covered their ears tightly. Even so, they still could not stop the sound of the zither and flute. It was like the whisper of Yama, drilling into their ears and deep into their minds, cutting their consciousness into countless painful pieces. Howls, screams, and cries of pain rang out continuously in the wilderness. The originally disciplined cavalrymen all became crazy at this moment. They covered their ears, their faces twisted in pain. Under such circumstances, the cavalrymen naturally could not lead the charge. The warhorses, who had lost their commanders, stopped jumping uneasily and paced back and forth in the wilderness, looking especially terrified and lost. The zither and flute were silent earlier because it was used against the horses. At this moment, Beigong Weiyang and Shimen Buhua were finally angry. The sound of the zither and flute gradually appeared and began to be used against the people. The moment the sound of the zither and flute sounded, the expressions of the academy disciples under the canopy suddenly changed. This was because they knew very well what kind of price Beigong and Shimen Buhua had to pay for this kind of music. Fourth brother reached out and wanted to stop Beigong from playing the zither, but seeing his waving wet black hair and his crazy and carefree expression, he could not bear to stop him. Outside the verdant canyon, there was a semicircle of 1,000 feet. Second brother stood inside. Outside the semicircle, countless cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army were lying on the ground. It was like the famous breakwater by the storm sea of the Kingdom of Song, but this black breakwater was filled with screams and cries of pain. Countless warhorses fell to the ground and died. Countless cavalrymen were crushed to death by the heavy warhorses. Countless horses and cavalrymen were still alive, but their flesh was broken and they were better off dead than alive. One could vaguely see cotton balls stuffed in the ears of some of the horses and cavalrymen. But it was obvious that these cotton balls did not have the desired effect. They were stained with red blood, probably because their eardrums had been shattered. This was an extremely tragic scene. Over the past countless years, there had been countless tragic wars in this world, but rarely had such a scene appeared. And all of this was because of a zither and a flute. Even the academy disciples under the canopy could not bear to see this scene. Second brother, who was standing at the forefront and closest to the corpses of the cavalrymen, had no expression on his face. His expression was still calm, and his eyebrows were still straight. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army's cavalry was still trying to charge towards the verdant canyon. However, the terrain was filled with the corpses of their comrades and warhorses, and it was difficult to find a gap. At this moment, a muffled sound came from the pile of corpses. A burly general from the South Jin Kingdom shouted and pushed away the corpses on him. He held an iron spear with both hands and rushed towards second brother. Behind him, there were still a few powerhouses who were not knocked down by the sound of the zither and flute. When they heard the shout, they stepped on their saddles and flew into the air, attacking second brother like flying stones. The general from the South Jin Kingdom was the most powerful and arrived the fastest. The iron spear in his hand stabbed out violently, forming a straight line in the air and forcing all the air out. The tip of the spear exploded with a thunderous sound. Second brother reached out expressionlessly and held the hilt of the iron sword. Then he smashed it down on the general from the South Jin Kingdom. It was not a chop, a hack, a cut, or a slice. It was a smash. The iron sword was square and wide, looking like a very thick piece of iron. When second brother held it in his hand and smashed it forward, a strong wind blew and the gravel on the ground rolled away in fear. The iron sword smashed onto the tip of the iron spear. The tip of the iron spear was smashed flat. The iron sword continued to smash down. The body of the iron spear was smashed and bent. The iron sword did not stop smashing down, as if it would never stop. The iron sword smashed onto the body of the general from the South Jin Kingdom. The armor on the general from the South Jin Kingdom was instantly shattered into countless pieces. Second senior brother ignored him and looked up at the martial arts experts who were flying through the air. He shook his right arm and swung the iron sword from left to right. This time, it was not a smash, but a slap. A slap like a fly. Those martial arts experts who were like flying stones were turned into real stones when they came into contact with the sword wind of the iron sword. They flew far into the wilderness and landed heavily on the ground. After a while, the few powerhouses stood up with their swords as support. The general from the South Jin Kingdom held the bent iron spear in his hand again. Second brother looked at him expressionlessly. The eyes of the general from the South Jin Kingdom revealed a look of despair and disbelief. With a puff, he spat out all the blood in his chest and abdomen. Then, he collapsed like a water bag that had been emptied. He fell to the ground, paralyzed. All the bones in the general's body were smashed by the iron sword. The few powerhouses in the distance also fell one after another. They were also broken. Second brother was covered in blood. It was all the enemy's blood. The blood dripped down along the edge of the armor and gradually converged into a stream of blood. It flowed to the 5 swords that were stuck in the field and then slowly seeped down along the place where the swords pierced. The swords were his trophies. The blood was also his trophies. He did not know how many swords he would plant in front of him in this battle of Verdant Canyon and how many enemies' blood he would use to water them. He did not care about the blood on his body and only looked at the field in front of him quietly. Because the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army was still attacking. This was really a boring battle. Killing, and then still killing. The hoofbeats of the warhorses were monotonous. The screams of the coalition cavalry were monotonous. The no longer beautiful flute and zither were monotonous too. The so-called monotonous was repetition. The sun in the sky gradually moved to the west and gradually turned red. The light that shone on the field also became much redder and warmer. On the field outside the Verdant Canyon, there were countless corpses. The screams of the corpses gradually subsided and the surroundings were deathly silent. The field in the dusk seemed to be smeared with blood. In fact, it was smeared with blood too. From noon to dusk, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army had filled in at least 1,000 cavalrymen. The zither and flute never stopped playing. Because Beigong and Shiman knew very well that as long as the zither and flute did not stop, second brother could not move. Second brother indeed did not move. He did not move. He still stood where he was. He did not take a step back. Because behind him was the Verdant Canyon. Behind the Verdant Canyon was the Tang Empire. Suddenly, the sound of gongs rang in the south of the field. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army finally called the cavalry to stop charging. It was not that they could not bear the loss. It was that the soldiers of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army felt very tired. The disciples of the academy were very tired. They were very tired. The Divine Hall Coalition army was very tired, in their hearts. This kind of tiredness was called fear. But there were also people who never knew what fear was. Ning Ke had always thought that she was very suitable to study in the academy. A blood-red figure appeared in the field in the dusk. Yi Hongyu's voice rang in the field. Jun Mo, fight with me. Second brother looked at the blood-red robe in the south that seemed to be burning in the dusk. You are no match for me. After saying this, he carried his iron sword and walked to the exit of the Verdant Canyon. At the exit of the Verdant Canyon, there were broken arrows on the roof like grass. Under the roof, water was boiling in a pot on the stove. The water was about to boil. It was time for dinner. Cool. I finally got the feeling back. 2 wolf howls. 2 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 750. Yi Hongyu stood in the field and looked at the back of the figure walking into the tent. She was silent for a long time with mixed emotions in her eyes. Then she turned around and walked back to the sacred sedan. As the sun set, the cavalry returned to camp. The music of the zither and flute in the Verdant Canyon gradually faded away. Beigong Weiyang and Shiman Buhua stopped playing, but they were still immersed in the previous atmosphere. Excitement, pleasure, and exhaustion mixed together until they were woken up by a heavy slap. Fourth brother glanced at Wang Qi and signaled him to be ready. Then he stretched out his palm and hit Beigong and Shiman heavily on their backs. Beigong and Shiman felt a sharp pain in their chests and spat out blood. They were confused and didn't have time to question their senior brother angrily when Wang Qi stuffed 2 pills into their mouths. A refreshing medicinal aura instantly pervaded their chests and abdomens, sweeping away all the irritated and manic feelings from before. The 2 of them felt much more comfortable, and only then did they understand why their senior brother wanted to hit them. You can't hold on for long if you fight like this. Fourth brother said, have a good rest tonight. Beigong Weiyang said, thank you for your help, senior brother. Fourth brother said, my slap is not the key. 11's medicine is the real good stuff. Wang Qi loved thinking, flowers, and healing people since he was a child. He didn't dare to say that his medical skills were unparalleled, but the medicine he developed was definitely the rarest in the world. Hearing his senior brother's praises, he shook his head in embarrassment. Just then, second brother walked into the tent. Everyone hurried forward and helped sixth senior brother remove the heavy armor on his body. Everyone thought of how Yi Hongyu had challenged him to a battle, and how senior brother had only said that she was no match for him before asking her to step down. They all praised senior brother's elegance. Second brother said calmly, "That girl is powerful. It will take some effort to defeat her. It's better not to fight if you can talk to her." Everyone was speechless when they realized that senior brother actually had such a thought when he turned around. Seventh sister thought mockingly, "So you are not as stupid as you usually appear." The pill quickly dissolved in his body. Beigong Weiyang felt that his spirit and psyche power had recovered. He said, "Let's have a good night's sleep and fight them tomorrow." Shiman Buhua was still excited and said, "That's right." No one answered them. Beigong Weiyang looked haggard and his fingers were all injured. Shiman Buhua was waving his hands in front of him, still maintaining the posture of playing the flute. He looked like a chicken's feet, funny and pitiful. Everyone could tell that if they were to risk their lives again, they might really lose their lives. "You guys have worked hard today. Let me do it tomorrow." Second senior brother patted Beigong and Shiman's shoulders. Beigong's body suddenly stiffened. Shiman's mouth opened and his eyes became wet. Second brother frowned slightly and asked, "What's wrong?" Beigong sighed and didn't say anything. Shiman Buhua wiped away his tears and said emotionally, "Senior brother, after so many years in the sect, this is the first time you praise me." Second brother was silent for a moment and then said seriously, "I will praise you more in the future." Seventh sister looked at Shiman Buhua's chicken claws and said jokingly, "I will stew chicken claws for you tonight." Shiman Buhua asked in confusion, "Why stew chicken claws?" Seventh sister held back her laughter and said seriously, "To make up for it." Shiman Buhua smiled bitterly and said, "Wouldn't that make it worse?" A burst of laughter rang out at the exit of the verdant canyon. The water was boiling and the rice was ready. Seventh sister began to prepare dinner. The people from the back of the mountain of the academy had prepared for this trip to the verdant canyon. They had brought enough rice and salted vegetables. They also had a ready-made stove. It was not difficult for her and Wang Qi to cook together. In the southern wilderness, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army began to pack up and cook. It seemed that today's battle had come to an end. Smoke rose everywhere and the atmosphere finally calmed down. However, the atmosphere at the exit of the verdant canyon became solemn. Second brother was the leader and the disciples stood behind him. They looked at the endless supply wagons in the south and their expressions became very ugly. The people who transported the food to the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army were from the warlords of Qinghe County. The food must have been stored in Qinghe County. Not long ago, it was the food of the Tang Empire. Beigong Weiyang said sternly, "One day, we will kill all these traitors." Shiman Buhua said in a low voice, "All the warlords must die." The two of them came from the southernmost island and were not born and raised in the Tang Empire. However, after living in the academy for so many years, they had long regarded themselves as Tangs. They were even angrier than fourth brother and the others. Fourth brother held the sand table and calculated for a moment. He said, "If we want to reclaim Qinghe County in the future, we have to kill at least 200,000 people to wipe out the warlords. Only then can we truly vent our anger." Hearing that they had to kill 200,000 people, Beigong and Shiman Buhua's expressions suddenly froze. They were refined scholars who had dedicated their lives to music. In their entire lives, they had never even killed a chicken. Even though more than 1,000 heavy cavalry had died to the sound of their zither and flute, they truly could not imagine doing something like massacring others with blood. It was quiet under the canopy. The disciples of the academy guarded the verdant canyon for Chang'an and the Tang Empire. They did not care how many people they had to kill. However, if there was a day in the future when they had to raise their butcher's knife, Beigong suddenly laughed and said, "Isn't there still youngest brother?" Shiman Buhua suddenly understood and said, "That's right, that's right. Youngest brother is best at this kind of thing." Fourth brother and sixth brother also nodded. They thought to themselves, if the academy wanted to kill all over the world, who else but youngest brother could do it? Second brother did not speak. Wang Qi said by the chopping board, "The cold dish is ready. Did you bring any sesame?" Second brother said, "Let's eat." At this moment, everyone suddenly smelled a faint burning smell. Seventh sister shouted and hurried to the stove. She saw that the rice had been burnt. Beigong Weiyang looked at the burnt rice and sighed. When headmaster took eldest brother on a trip, the food in the back of the mountain was not good. Shiman Buhua said with nostalgia, when Sang Sang was in the academy, everyone ate the best. No one blamed seventh sister, but she felt very uneasy. The array outside the verdant canyon had been completed. Compared with second brother and the other brothers, her main job was to take care of the logistics. It was very easy, but she still failed to do it well. After a moment, her uneasiness turned into anger. She said angrily, "Sixth brother, this stove is used to forge iron and swords. The temperature is too high. How can it be suitable for cooking?" Second brother raised his eyebrows and said unhappily, "That's unreasonable and rude." Seventh sister was startled and said angrily, "If you think my cooking is not good, then don't eat it." After a simple meal, those who needed to rest rested and those who needed to prepare for tomorrow began to prepare. Fourth brother said, Pamela was under a lot of psychological pressure, so she was a little embarrassed. When you scolded her, she felt even more wronged, so she yelled at you. Don't blame her. Second brother frowned slightly and said, "Why did she feel wronged?" Fourth brother said, "She was worried about you, so she lost her composure. In the end, she was even scolded by you. She felt wronged." Second brother was slightly startled. After a long silence, he said, "That's not necessary." Fourth brother stopped talking about this because the disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy had been discussing this matter in private for several years, but they had never come to a conclusion. He turned to look at the entrance of the verdant canyon behind the tent. Looking at the faintly discernible stones inside, he said, "If the divine hall is not prepared, we should still guard in the canyon. It will save us energy." Second brother said, "Everything must be done safely. That is the biggest mistake." Today's battle is clear, but the divine hall keeps sending out cavalry. They want to force us into the canyon. Although I don't know what they will do after entering the verdant canyon, I don't want to retreat until the last moment. Why? Because as long as we retreat one step, we may retreat many more steps. Fourth brother turned around and looked at the dark camp of the Allied army in the southern wilderness, saying, "I'm more worried about whether the other party will launch a night attack." Second brother looked up at the bright moon in the night sky and said, "With the teacher watching from the sky, they won't dare to do that." Unknowingly, the other disciples also came out from the tent and stood behind the two senior brothers. They looked up at the bright moon in the night sky, each with nostalgia. "Is it really the teacher?" Wang Qi asked. Second brother said, "Maybe." Sixth brother was not as sentimental as the other disciples. He was used to thinking about simple and realistic problems. He said, "Firewood is a problem. If we want to go into the canyon to collect firewood, we will be easily attacked." Second brother pointed to the field outside the tent. There were dense arrows like a wheat field and said, "There is firewood everywhere." Unlike the entrance of the verdant canyon, which was sometimes lively and sometimes sad, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army camp was filled with frustration and depression. It was very quiet. Bai Haixin drank a cup of wine and ate 2 bowls of rice. Then he signaled his subordinates to remove the table. Then he walked out of the tent and looked at the green mountains under the moonlight. He frowned and fell into a long silence. He was the commander of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, but in fact, he was not even in the top 5. How could he dare to give orders to the 2 great divine priests of West Hill and the sage of sword Lu Bai? This was his distress. He did not know what the bigwigs of the Divine Hall were thinking. He did not understand why they had to sacrifice so many cavalrymen just to force the academy into the verdant canyon. Since they were going to guard the main road, it was naturally more suitable to guard in the canyon. What he did not understand was why the academy would rather fight with the army in the field than take a few steps back and enter the verdant canyon. A priest in red walked over and handed him a piece of paper. Bai Haixin looked at it and frowned even more. He thought, are we going to continue to die tomorrow? Let all the martial arts cultivators from the cultivation sects and the army come to the tent. Looking back at the Winter Lake, it is the second volume. I found that it is really well written. There is still one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.